Hello, welcome to Cinema Savvy. This almost feels like a dream right now. This almost doesn't feel like this is happening. In almost 7 years on the channel, I'm actually finally getting to talk about Lord of the Rings properly, the main trilogy, one of the most impactful things of my life. Oh, hang on, my computer just froze there. Oh God, no, not now. Why did it? Am I good? I think I'm good. Okay, we're good. And as you can see, to my left or to my right, whichever way you're looking at this, I'm joined with Harry, who isn't a stranger to the channel. He has appeared on Cinema Savvy before, predominantly, well, I think only on a few of the Battle of the Brackets episodes. And in terms of your first review on the channel, I mean,
Yeah,
get
I
any
feel like
better,
this is a
right?
this is a bit of an intimidating one. Yeah, it's there's a lot to sort of talk about here, so I feel like I've got a lot to live up to.
Yeah,
I'll do
no,
it
me
justice.
too. Like, even, I've been doing this for a while, but talking about this film, we do have a plan. We did come up with a plan beforehand because we needed to.
Yeah.
But even then, like as soon as I hit live, I thought, "Oh God, this is happening. This is, it's immense."
Yeah.
But this is going to be a really fun one, I think.
No, I mean it's hard to like overstate like how important and how huge these films are. So like to really sort of delve into why we love them so much, it's going to be such a colossal undertaking.
Yeah, absolutely. And the reason that we've done this review is that tomorrow, Sunday, the 19th of December, will be the 20th anniversary of this film right here. We will be covering the trilogy over the next week or so. But this one in particular, I can't believe it's been 20 years. I say that every single time. I was the tender age of 8 years old, going on 9, but 8 years old when this came out, and now I'm almost like Gandalf, pretty much. Let's be honest. But yeah, before we get into this thing, just a very, very quick blast over the socials because we've got a lot to talk about. And obviously, before we get into it, we want to hand over to you guys as well. This is a live discussion. We'll be talking about it, but please feel free to join in with us as well. Let us know your thoughts on the Lord of the Rings, specifically Fellowship. But if you want to talk Lord of the Rings and everything in between about it, you go right ahead. This is the time to do it. And if you want to follow us on our social medias as well to know not just when our other reviews are coming out, but also when the rest of the Lord of the Rings reviews are coming out. Those are the socials at the bottom of the screen right there. That's Twitter at cinema_savvy, facebook.com/cinemasavvy, and letterbox.com/cinemasavvy also. Okay, I think we can dive into it. So
Just go straight into it.
So I'm going to pass over to you first, but I guess how did you get into the Lord of the Rings? Did you read the books before, just like the world of Tolkien? Can you remember a sort of inception point of when you got into this mythology?
So it's very hard to sort of pinpoint the exact moment. Like you said, these ones are 20 years old, so I'd have been the ripe old age of 3 when this film came out. So I actually, until last year, had no experience seeing any of them in the cinemas at all.
Wow.
It's all seeing them at home. So yeah, I can't going all that way back. Yeah, so my first experience with it was with my dad. So my dad's favorite series of all time is Lord of the Rings. It's his favorite books, and from a young age, I was. It wasn't so much of a choice as an obligation to watch the Lord of the Rings films. That was his way of getting me into sort of the mythology. I think even for a fan of fantasy and the like, the Lord of the Rings books are a bit dense for a 6-year-old, whereas the films are a little bit more digestible. So yeah, I remember we sat down, we got out the extended cut, and launched straight into Fellowship, and I was absolutely taken away by it. Like, I've always been a lover of fantasy and genre. Like, I love sci-fi, Star Wars as well. I was a big part of my childhood, but Lord of the Rings has always held that little special place in my heart, and I think it's just because of how early I was exposed to it and how much passion my dad genuinely had for the series and how much I then loved it, sort of that experience watching it with him. So yeah, I think that was my first exposure to the series. I didn't actually read the books until many years later, after many rewatchings of the trilogy, before I actually looked at the source material. So to me, the films are Lord of the Rings even more so than the books are, because that's what I was exposed to. That's what I loved about Lord of the Rings.
It sounds very similar to me then, in that my sort of exposure to the Lord of the Rings came from this film that we're talking about right now. I hadn't read the books or anything like that. Saying that, though, I do have this strange sort of sense memory of being in first year of school. And you know, when you have story time, I mentioned this on the review that I did for the animated Lord of the Rings, but I'll go over it again quickly. You used to have story time. The teacher would sit at the front with this giant oversized book, like this double page spread with like massive words on the page. There's like 4 words on a page. And I don't know what it would have been. I'd love to track down this book if I can find it, just to add it into my collection. But it was an excerpt from the Hobbit book, Fire and Water, where the thrush tells Bard of where to shoot Smaug in the weak spot.
Right.
And it was this great double-page spread of the burning roofs of Lake Town and Smaug in the air and this tiny little bird compared to it. And that image just kind of stuck in my mind. And obviously, it was many years later. I probably didn't even realize at the time that connected with this or anything like that. But I distinctly remember that story at school. But yeah, this film, I was 8 years old. I was like 1 month away from turning 9. Now, I had a very short attention span. Arguably, I still kind of do a little bit now, so maybe that hasn't changed. But especially when it came to film, very incredibly short attention span. And I remember at the time, especially, I mean, I keep forgetting how much younger you are compared to me, but at the time you had 2 massive tentpole fantasy franchises happening at the same time. You had Harry Potter and you had Lord of the Rings. At that time, I was very much into Harry Potter.
Right.
Harry Potter was my life. I think being at school, you connect with those characters maybe a little bit more. It's a similar kind of school setting, and it's all wondrous and, you know, whimsical and everything like that. So I was already a Harry Potter fan at that point. And then going into this one, it didn't hold my attention. I must have been one of those annoying, restless 8-year-olds in the cinema. You just want to smack them now. It's just like, pay attention to the film. And there were only certain moments of the film that genuinely stuck out to me. I just remember sort of not really connecting with it, but then the Balrog showed up, and I love the monsters and I love creatures and everything like that. So I loved the cave troll part, straight into the Balrog. Loved all of that, and like the ending with the Uruk-hai. And I remember it ending, not knowing anything about Lord of the Rings, not knowing the books they're based on, not knowing it's a trilogy, being very, very surprised when the film suddenly ends with Frodo and Sam just walking down like a rock, fade to black. And I thought, they didn't destroy the ring, like, you haven't told the story. And being very confused by this. So at the time, I really didn't care for the film or the Lord of the Rings. It's mad. And it wasn't until it was released, and I have it right here, Gathering Dust, when it was released on video. Remember these things?
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
When this came out, I watched it on my very tiny, actually, I think it's still outside, very small TV video combi. And I watched it with my mum. And my mum had a friend who was a massive Tolkien fan, would always tell her about the Lord of the Rings. My mum had never read the book, but she'd heard about the Lord of the Rings and Tolkien. And we sat and watched the film together. And, you know, there was this sense of awe. Like, I remember my mum saying, like, I have never seen a film like this before. This is incredible. This is influential. This is life-changing almost. And I think maybe it was from her influence, it kind of made me look at the film a little bit differently as well. And within that like half a year gap, I guess, that must have done wonders, because then all of a sudden, Harry Potter was out, Lord of the Rings was in, and it was like a switch overnight. And then from that point onwards, certainly gearing up for Two Towers, the merchandise was a massive thing as well, I remember at the time. Even now, that's something that hasn't changed. I'm still trying to collect all that merchandise.
I was going to say, yeah, I can see it all in the back of your room. So
yeah.
I think it's merchandise. That's just actually brought something to my mind as well. I remember now vividly growing up with little action figures of all the Lord of the Rings characters. So I remember, so I had Boromir. He was always my favorite. He was his classic sword, and I loved him. Loved it to pieces.
They have like the little lever at the back, like the sword.
Oh yeah, so it's his arm locked in place, just swinging round. Yeah. No, it was brilliant. Yeah, I love those things. That's a little flash to the past there with that sort of stuff.
And even the books, and I don't want to sort of like mire this in like a film to book comparison. We might talk about some of like the major moments in the film that deviate, but like you, it wasn't until years later, I actually embarrassingly want to say 2 years ago, that I actually read the Lord of the Rings book beginning to end. I did try. That's a try word here. Mm-hmm. Right after this film, or probably when I was into Lord of the Rings at that point, so 9 years old, I did attempt to read the book. Going to your school library, a lot of people taking out Roald Dahl books or even shorter books, and there was me. It wasn't just Fellowship; it was the tome.
The whole thing,
the full 3-volume. It's actually, I think it was this one. I grab it right here. This front cover.
Good. Yeah, that absolutely
just that
monstrous book.
Appendices, everything. Like you probably can't see. Oh, I can't see. It's right up against me. That text is minuscule, paper thin, but like Bible paper thin pages. And I tried to read that at the age of 9, and I got to the Great River. I got to just after Galadriel. I will give myself credit for that, but.
No, I think in my first reading, I think I got up to Shelob, and I was like,
oh wow.
Well, you got to remember the way the books are structured. That's only like halfway. That's not the third one. That's still only the second book. So I got up to that far when I was like 9 or 10, and then I just did. I picked up. I vividly remember picking up Return of the King. I opened it, read the first chapter. The focus was back on like Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli. I was like, no. I want to find out what happens with Frodo and Sam. Forget it. I'm not doing this. Put it down. Didn't pick it back up again for 4 or 5 more years. Yeah.
And
The Hobbit, however, devoured that book. I read that book cover to cover so many times. So I think that was also actually a big influence on like my love of Tolkien was my love of The Hobbit. I had the Hobbit graphic novel, which I don't think anyone else in the world actually had.
I vaguely remember that.
I think I still have it. Maybe I do actually. 1 second.
You get that thing. Go on.
Let's get it out. Yeah, this absolutely battered old Hobbit graphic novel. So it's got these lovely little art pieces inside it. So yeah, as you can see from the condition of this book with its missing chunks of it, I've read this book quite a few times. So yeah, I think that was a big part of my my love for the series there.
The same with me as well. Like the Hobbit book, I think I don't know how I discovered it. I think it was like, oh, there's another Tolkien book, and oh, this is actually a prequel to Lord of the Rings. This is set before, and having a knowledge of the films at that point, going back to the book, it was nice to see where all the threads, and even watching the film where he's like surrounded by 3 monstrous trolls, and you're like, and this is this part of the story.
And when Gollum turns up, and he's like, oh my god, my old friend Gollum, he's back. Like, that was seeing this interconnected story almost between 2 different things was mind blowing as a kid. Obviously now this generation is growing up with stuff like the MCU, where like things being interconnected is a given, but back then it was a lot less common. So seeing these characters pop up repeatedly over time was awesome.
Yeah, and sort of getting a sense even at that age, how expansive the lore is. I remember reading there's like a sentence towards the back of The Hobbit where it's like Gandalf went to a meeting of the White Wizards and the White Council drove out the Necromancer, and I was like, what Necromancer? And then you do
the Necromancer. What's going on? Yeah,
you do your own research. You like Gandalf going to Minas Tirith, pouring through parchment and notes, and just like trying to make sense of it all, even from that early age. And trying to read the Lord of the Rings multiple times, constantly hitting Tom Bombadil and wanting to kill myself.
You just got poor taste, Chris, and that's okay. I'm glad that you can publicly admit it like this.
But I think definitely sort of like coming back to the films now, that experience of watching the films first and having those so ingrained in my mind, it was challenging then going to the book. And the 2 are very separate entities.
Absolutely, I can't say that enough. Like, Peter Jackson definitely had his own vision for the way the world of Lord of the Rings was. And I stand by it is one of the most successful adaptations of a book to film ever. And that's in a lot of ways because it wasn't entirely consistent with the source material. If you had it consistent, like Tolkien, in the way that he wrote it as a historical text. It's deliberate. You can see in his writings on The Hobbit, he's a very good storyteller if he wants to be. But in Lord of the Rings, he didn't write it as a story to be indulged in. It's a world to immerse yourself in. So Peter Jackson did a fantastic job, I think, of transferring the spirit of that story into a much more consumable form on the big screen.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you either go 2 ways with adaptation. You either go in the way of like Zack Snyder's Watchmen, where you do it shot for shot, beat for beat. And with a book like this, like you can't do that. It's, for the longest time, directors were saying it was unfilmable. I think, big screen adaptations of the Lord of the Rings were offered to the likes of Stanley Kubrick, and he was just like, you can't do it. It's not possible. And even when I watch this now, even when you watch like the 9 hours of special features, which are just as much of a joy to watch than the films themselves, for me, they're incredible. I'd go so far as to say they're the best behind the scenes of any
Oh,
film
yeah.
there is. It's like Film School 101. It's like every avenue of filmmaking is documented in those.
Yeah.
Even with like home media, when those 4-disc editions came out, that was my first sort of exposure to extended versions of films.
Yeah, that was my
behind
first
the
exposure
scenes.
to Lord of the Rings at all. So for years, I didn't know there was non-extended versions of Lord of the Rings. When people said they sat down to watch Lord of the Rings, I was like, okay, cool. You sit down for 4 hours, then you crack out the extended editions, you watch every little detail. I remember the first time I watched the non-extended cut in school when I was in year 6, and I was like, oh, miss, you must have skipped a bit. You've missed a scene there. And she was like, no, it's all right. You're not getting the full experience. You're not getting the whole story. So I was an elitist from an early age. That's like, only one way to consume this media. Everything else is wrong.
You know what us Tolkien fans are like when we get on our high horse, like we're unstoppable.
Exactly.
But yeah, like I remember getting that 4-disc edition and then kind of being aware that, oh, if I wait an extra year, I mean, I still bought the videos each year for the theatricals, but I was like, if I wait an extra year, I was like, is there going to be a 2 Towers extended edition? And, you know, lo and behold, it was there. And then if I wait an extra year, you know, Christmas Day, watching the films, going, that's a new scene. And it was a fun, exhilarating experience to sort of like consume and being aware of new scenes that were in the film. And it was tremendous. And, you know, younger version of me watching 9 hours of behind the scenes, I would never have done that for any film. I mean, I don't even think any other film has 9 hours of behind the scenes, granted, but it was just a riveting experience to watch, really. And talking about Peter Jackson, you mentioned there about his vision that he had for this world. You know, recently on the channel, we've gone through all of his previous filmography in the lead up to the Lord of the Rings. So this video, these series of videos that we're going to do on the Lord of the Rings, that it's kind of like an offshoot of that series that we were doing. It's a continuation of it, but Lord of the Rings deserves its own kind of bracketed kind of section on the channel. How, even up to his latest film before this, which was The Frighteners, how Peter Jackson got given the keys to the kingdom for Middle-earth, Tolkien, Lord of the Rings, and made these films as good as they are, is still just a giant question.
It's staggering. Yeah, it's unbelievable that he was able to complete it. Like you say, like so many directors said this was unfilmable, and I think honestly that's the only reason that he got the keys, because he was the only one where, you know what, I'll give it a go. You know, I back myself. I can do these films, and he clearly had this vision that he stuck to it, and like you can feel his influence in every aspect of the films, every little thing. You can tell his passion like bled through into every scene. Like the fact that the films were all filmed sequentially, they're all filmed like in one giant go, is a brilliant idea that I think so few directors would have actually had the guts to go through with, because it's such a huge commitment. You're saying, okay, I am so confident in myself that this is going to be a success. I'm going to film another 8 hours of film here at the same time before I release the first one, because that's how confident I am. And you can see it, like even this year with Dune and Dune 2, like studios just were not willing to back that anymore. Dune, I think, is probably the closest modern example we can have, like of the Lord of the Rings, of these again unfilmable films. And yeah, I as much as I enjoyed Dune, I don't think it holds a candle to Peter Jackson's direction in Lord of the Rings, because it's just it really was a lightning in a bottle moment, and I don't think we're ever going to see its like ever again.
No, I think the studio system now is so completely different. I mean, this was a gamble for everyone. You know, this I won't say up and coming. I guess he was kind of an up and coming director. You know,
well, this made him at the very least. Like he may have been known in like for some very select circles, but he was a household name after these films.
Absolutely, yeah. And you know, going to the studio, and I think originally he pitched 2 films, I think it was. And you know, he kind of, I think he went from studio to studio. I think he went to Miramax first, and they said, you know, we're not going to do it. He went to New Line, pitched it as 2 films, and they basically said this is 3 films. Which is a fantastic decision.
It's the best response. Yeah, they were like, you know what, I like you. Yeah, we like this idea, but I don't think you're spending enough time in it. Let's give you more films. Let's give you more time to adapt these processes, and not in a way like The Hobbit, in my opinion, which was one, but in the words of Bilbo, like spread too thin. But The Lord of the Rings, it just gave it that time to breathe, and I think without that fantastic decision by the execs there, these films wouldn't be held in nearly as high regard as they are.
Yeah, and you know, you could say that there might be some studio involvement here or there, but predominantly, and a good comparison to the Hobbit films as well. I don't want to talk too much about the Hobbit. That'll be next year
course,
when it's the 10-year anniversary for those films. Christ Almighty,
Wow, that's
time
bizarre.
keeps marching on.
Yeah.
But how the Hobbit films were definitely a trilogy of films ran by committee.
Yeah.
There's too many cooks in the kitchen, and also not enough planning time. I don't completely absolve Peter Jackson of all the blame. I do think he made some very questionable decisions, but you get the impression that those were films that he didn't want to make, and
yeah, he was thrust into the role because he cared so much about the films. He cared, and again, like his care from the Lord of the Rings almost carried him through those films. I think, like, without the love that he had for Tolkien and the Middle Earth, I don't think he would have ever got involved with what looked to be quite a car crash from fairly early on.
Yeah.
I think like the Lord of the Rings as a trilogy just doesn't exist without Peter Jackson. It is his love child. It is his creation. As much as you say it is Tolkien's story, the books and the films are two separate entities. It is Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. It is just inseparable from his vision for the trilogy.
And what I love about was his pitch to the cast and crew. He says that he wanted to make Middle Earth as plausible and believable as possible. He wanted to say, like, all this armor and these landscapes and everything. He says, like, I almost want you to think that you're discovering ruins of like an ancient time, a legend, which is exactly what Tolkien did with his Legendarium. It is meant to be sort of like a precursor to modern Earth. It is its own story and kingdom, but that's what it was designed to be. It was designed to be an English mythology because, through various conquests and stuff, England doesn't really have a mythology. And if we did, it's all been, destroyed through, Saxons, I think, and everything like that, images and everything like that. And he wanted to make, a sort of English legend, really, which is predominantly what Lord of the Rings is. And I think that's the perfect angle that Jackson went with. And you look at this film and it feels, the sense of world building is incredible. And you have to give Tolkien like pretty much a lot of the credit for that. But to visually realize that on screen, when you watch it, you don't feel like you're watching. Well, at least maybe because I'm not from New Zealand. I'm sure people from New Zealand see it as New Zealand. But it genuinely feels like you are in a real alternate world.
Absolutely,
a second world, essentially.
Yeah, no, I think. Yeah, to me, like, I feel if I ever did go to New Zealand, and I absolutely intend to, if I was to walk along that landscape, I wouldn't feel as though I was in New Zealand, the country. I'd feel as though I was in Middle Earth, and it's just how much he managed to capture that sense of wonder. Obviously, I can't speak from experience, and neither can you, in the sense that we never read the books first, so my vision reading the books will always be tainted in a way by the films. I will always have, when I read about Strider sitting in Bree, I know I visualize Viggo Mortensen. I cannot separate the two in my mind, but from what I understand, those who've read the books and then go later to watch the films, it's the same for them. They will now go back and read the books and they will visualize Viggo Mortensen sitting in the tavern, because that is how perfectly it captured the atmosphere of the Lord of the Rings. Like you say, a lot of these little details were cut and removed, but the spirit of those books is absolutely still there, present in every scene. It is just dripping with atmosphere. And like the love and care and passion and the craftsmanship that went into the film is remarkable. It's remarkable, rather.
Yeah, you can't imagine it being filmed anywhere else. And of course, we are going to have to get used to that fact, because I know that season 2 of the Amazon show, due to COVID regulations and everything like that with the country of New Zealand, they're not even allowing filming for their Middle Earth series. And when Middle Earth is their big tourist cash cow and they're not even letting them in the country, that things are bad. So
they're taking it very seriously.
Absolutely. So that's going to be a shift, because New Zealand's all we've known with this place. Absolutely. Right? And there is actually a really funny story I want to throw out there really quickly. I was in year 6 at school, and we were talking about Lord of the Rings. I don't know why we're talking about Lord of the Rings. It would have been sort of like in the heat when the films were out, and my teacher at the time was just going off on one about how she was really angry that it was being filmed in New Zealand. Like, it's a British book and he came from Birmingham and the films should be filmed in Birmingham. I was like, do you want the Fellowship running through the Bullring shopping centre in Birmingham? Like, come on.
Kind of, now that you've said it, I'd love to see a recreation now for the 20th anniversary. They refilmed the entire trilogy set entirely in the Birmingham town centre.
With all of the unfortunate accents as well.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry if anyone's from, whatever.
I'm from the Birmingham area,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
yeah,
me too. It's fine. I'm allowed to say that. We're allowed to say
exactly, yeah. It's rubbish, but it's ours.
yeah.
So
But yeah, the whole Peter Jackson thing, it's incredible. It's been really fun going back through a lot of his old films, and you can see the drips and drabs, like, especially, well, at this time, this was Peter Jackson at a simpler time in his career where he would use makeup and he would use props and real locations and have that sense of realism.
yeah,
Whether it's Brain Dead, Meet the Feebles, just practical effects, props, costumes, everything like that. It was outstanding, and you can see that sense of sense of humor that he had with those older films. And you can see elements of that. There's a lot of gory moments in these films. There's a lot of decapitations, and he definitely has his fun with that. And the excesses, shall we say, which
yeah.
as his career continued, he definitely double down on some of those, especially by the time we get to King Kong, for example. But yeah, I mean, he was on like roids with this film. Like, I don't know where that progression from The Frighteners to this happened.
It's bizarre. Because it's
It's
not like, even if you look back at like the budget that the Lord of the Rings films has, it wasn't as excessive as you might expect it to be. Because obviously, like you say, it
no,
was all
yeah.
filmed on location, it was all practical effects, and they are by a huge mile a lot less expensive than CGI. And like, thank God they were, because if you look back at the CGI from that sort of era, you look back at like X-Men, for example, from the same sort of era, Wolverine's claws. If you look at that compared to like anything in Lord of the Rings to an extent, like it's night and day. There's a reason these films have held up so well and stood the test of time, and the reason they will keep standing this test of time, because those practical effects are just, yeah, like they're brilliant, and it's just hard to really show. It's just all those little things. I keep coming back to it. Like, it really was such an unlikely success. There are so many things that could have gone horribly, horribly wrong with it, but none of them did. It all worked out perfectly, and we're left with this absolute gem of a trilogy that, to me, is pretty much untouchable.
And I can't even imagine these films being made today. I think
No.
that it was the perfect time, the perfect moment. As you mentioned, lightning in a bottle. I think that's exactly like the phraseology to use for it as well. And even this film was, hugely acclaimed when it came out. I think it was it 13 Oscar nominations? This one only
Something
won
like that.
4. We'll get to
I
Return
know,
of the King.
letting
It's
itself
coming.
down.
It's coming.
It is, however, the only one in the trilogy that had an acting nomination, so that's exciting.
Yes. Yeah, I mean,
For Ian McKellen.
it ended up winning for best cinematography, best makeup, original score, and visual effects. But yeah, as you rightly said,
It was the only time he got a nom
nominated.
for best supporting actor in Ian McKellen.
I'll say Sean Astin was robbed from Return of the King. I will say that.
I mean, it's hard because, again, like, I think it leads nicely onto our next sort of topic of conversation. But because every member of the cast is so excellent, you really can't single out any of them as deserving an award over the others. Again, don't get me wrong, like, Sean Astin is absolutely stunning in Return of the King, as Ian McKellen is in The Fellowship. But there are no weak members of the cast. I challenge you to point to any member of the cast and say, I'd have cast someone else there. No, they're not quite right. I think it was a miracle, again, of casting. It's absolutely stunning.
And it's to this point now where I can't imagine any other actors in those roles. Like, if you were, God forbid, to remake this in any way, shape, or form, I can't imagine anyone other than Christopher Lee as Saruman, as Ian McKellen as Gandalf, Viggo Mortensen as Aragorn, and the cast continues and continues. And it's no hyperbole when I say that I think this is the most perfectly casted films of all time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even like most of the actors at the time, they'd done projects before, but I'd never heard of Billy Boyd or Dominic Monaghan, or I know Elijah Wood had done a few things, was a child actor before. You did have your stalwart actors in there like Ian McKellen, Ian Holm, for example, Christopher Lee, of course, but
even then they were the supporting cast. You're giving them the spotlight to these relatively unknown actors, again, like giving it to child actors like Elijah Wood and Sean Astin, who up until the point of Lord of the Rings hadn't really done anything exceptional. Like, I'm not saying they were bad actors by any means, but they had no real standout hits, with the exception of the Goonies for Sean Astin, in my opinion, but slightly different vibes.
So I don't
really see that again, it's a very brave decision. Everything about Lord of the Rings was a gamble. It was a risk, and they absolutely pulled it off. So
it's difficult to put into words, isn't it? Like
yeah, it
what we
really
want.
is.
I know what I want to say about this film, but it's
Yeah, if you could
so,
just
so
like peer inside my brain right now, it's all there. It's all visual, bouncing around my
yeah,
skull. I just can't quite verbalize it.
absolutely. And Yanis is going to try and attempt it for us. Perfect movie, perfect trilogy.
Yeah,
Absolutely. I couldn't point to a single negative about this film. I really couldn't.
no,
And
honestly,
that's not me exaggerating in any way, shape, or form. But
I'm doing it now. I'm going through every scene in my head,
yeah,
thinking, how
just
would I do this differently?
like hats off to the casting director for this thing, because even
Stunning.
actors I would never have dreamed of even
No,
entertaining the idea of casting, and they all knocked it out
it's
of the park. Some of these actors, even post these films, I would say haven't even lived up to what they did with these films in some
no,
ways. Like this is, for better or worse, maybe some of the cast members are typecast to this film in some
no,
way or these
absolutely, yeah.
roles, but you don't really see the actor, you see the character, which is so key for this whole
Absolutely.
cast. And what I
It's
love
when you
about
go back and look at those early casting things, where you look at like, who nearly played Aragorn in Lord of the Rings? People like Nicolas Cage, and I'm like, good lord, like, don't worry, I think the casting is stunning across the board, but Viggo Mortensen will always stand out to me as just absolutely stunning because of the way he made the character his own. Again, like we've said, it's a separate idea from the films to the books, but the character of Aragorn in the books is a very different character to Aragorn in the films, and I think that the
yeah.
way P. Jackson and Viggo Mortensen took Aragorn is so, in my opinion, don't crucify me here. I think it's infinitely more compelling than the character in the books, and I
No, I
think
agree.
that casting was
I agree.
absolutely stunning. So you look back and you look at these castings and who it might have been, and like who knows? Maybe you give Nicolas Cage this job, maybe he does a great job. He's very inconsistent. So
Yeah.
maybe this would have been one of the times he actually delivers, but I find it hard to believe that anyone could have done any of these roles better than the people who were cast in it. They were just perfect.
And the brilliant thing about Vigo was like he was a very last minute decision.
Oh
I
yeah.
think they were like filming, what was it, like a week, maybe a couple of weeks before. His son was the one who convinced him to take the role, and thank God that his son was a Tolkien fan and convinced his dad to do it. Because again, you can't imagine anyone else. I completely agree with you. I love what they do with Aragorn's character throughout the course of these films. Just a fantastic arc and so different from the book.
Absolutely, yeah.
The book is that unwavering
Yeah,
paragon of a character right from the off. He has the sword pretty much. He has the
yeah.
broken
He
shards
has
with
it
it.
when he leaves Rivendell. He gets really aggressive about it, and Rohan refuses to give up his sword because he's the rightful king, and how dare you disarm a king?
Mhm.
And if they'd done that in the films, we'd never have had that amazing fist fight we'll talk about in the next video.
Oh,
Like, I mean, yeah, it's bizarre to say, and it's even more shocking the fact that I read this a few years ago that Viggo Mortensen isn't a fan of Lord of the Rings,
mm.
isn't a fan of the trilogy at all. I don't believe has read the books or doesn't particularly enjoy watching the films or anything like that. He's not a fan of the trilogy, but despite that, I think gave one of the greatest performances we'll ever see from like. It's hard. It's almost like a leading role but a character actor at the same time, if that makes sense, because he went so deep with these little idiosyncrasies of Aragorn. I think are so inseparable now from the character. Just everything about his dedication to the role. I'm sure we won't get into the myths surrounding Viggo Mortensen's, uh, you know, attachment to these films. The him hiking with Sean Bean up the mountains and all the rest of it. Because I'm sure anyone who's watching this video has heard all those facts before. But like, it is bizarre the lengths that he went to really become Aragorn, fighting with the steel sword because the aluminium sword wasn't convincing enough, and all the rest of it.
Deflecting
It's
actual
yeah,
knives
deflecting
thrown at him,
actual
right?
knives. Yeah,
And
like
the sword play, like I think he wasn't given any sword training or very little sword training. And I
I,
think his
I
first day
believe,
on
yeah, they said
shooting
he
was Weathertop, wasn't it? I think fighting the
something
ring
like that.
wraiths.
Yeah, I believe the choreographer said he was by far the best like sword fighter that he'd ever trained in his life ever because it was just so natural to him. Like I think for a lot of these actors, it wasn't the physicality of the role
Mm.
was a lot more difficult for some than others, but I think he just loved that side of it. He clearly got so stuck into the role and stuck into the exertion. I mean, does that phrase scrubs up well? I think Viggo Mortensen is the opposite. He grimes up well. He really got stuck into
Yeah.
the mud. Yeah, when he was covered in filth and dripping with water, like that's when he's at his peak, I think.
Yeah, when he cleans himself up at the end of Return of the King, you know, he gets a haircut, he gets
it's
a
not
beard
quite the
trim. It's
same.
like,
You need a
oh,
bit more scruff,
no.
mate. You know, let's get you back in the wild for 20 minutes, then come have your coronation.
But yeah, I mean, Viggo is just a man's man, isn't he? Like he's a fisherman, he's a poet, he's an actor, he's a photographer. Like you name it, he's done it. And yeah, he's brilliant. I love what they do. You know, that sort of rags to riches kind of character.
Absolutely,
Almost.
yeah.
You know, he's trying to evade his past, and he's scared, you know, about what happened with his ancestors, and he fears that he will become the same. And this is why I love the adaptation of this, because although it does deviate from the source material, I think the spirit is there.
Absolutely,
and I think that's the key when it comes to adaptation, is you can make something that's a shot for shot, and you know, maybe it'll be good. You can either make it you know, wildly different, but as long as you stay true to like the core sensibilities of the source material and the spirit of it and the message that it's trying to get across, which I think these films did, I think you can play fast and loose with some of it. And there are a number of decisions, you know, specifically with this film as well, that I do much prefer to the book. I love its sense of urgency as well, like the pacing of it at the beginning. And you know, don't crucify me, Tom Bombadil fans, but you know, like the Old Forest and Tom Bombadil and the Barrow Downs. And don't get me wrong, the Barrow Downs would have been fantastic. I would have loved to have seen that. Peter Jackson's a horror director. I think he would have done that very well. But the sense of pacing and the focus as well, like Peter Jackson and, you know, Fran Walsh, Philippa Boyens, they all wanted to go in with the focus of Frodo being the main character. Is this scene furthering Frodo's story and him as a character? That was always at their forefront. And yeah, it does deviate off and you get scenes with other characters, but that was always, you know, is this actually relevant to the story? And, and in fact, a lot of adaptations, even before this, they always go in with a shears straight away to Tom Bombadil and just cut that segment out. For better or worse, I think definitely for better, especially
You're wrong, but that's okay.
But just tonally as well, like even Bree, you know, the first half of Fellowship, the book, it feels very whimsical. It almost feels in the same kind of vein as The Hobbit very much. It feels like Tolkien's trying to find himself, find the tone that he wants.
Which I think is very deliberate. You know, you have that sort of that transition from this whimsical four lads going out on an adventure, getting chased away by farmers, having a right laugh, into this very then serious idea of like, oh, okay, these four lads who were just watching getting drunk at the pub and stealing from people and running around, you know, just chilling with the boys, are now going on a quest to save literally every sentient being alive. And that's I feel that's a deliberate juxtaposition. But I think the films do this in a way that is so much more concise. I think just the opening sequence with Bilbo's 111th birthday is just, I think it's perfect. You know everything you need to know about every single, well, all of the hobbits and Gandalf at least. At the end of that sequence, you know exactly who Frodo is and why he's doing what he is. You know exactly who Sam is and why he's so dedicated to Frodo and who he is at his core. You know who Merry and Pippin are. You know why they are more than just comic relief. And don't get me wrong, they are comic relief 90% of the time they're on screen. But you still know who they are at the core of their person. And I think that's such a great way of having this sort of whimsical thing twist again with the introduction of the ring race. And you say, given Peter Jackson's stint as a horror director, I think led so perfectly into the idea of like, look at this nice sleepy village with all these people chilling and eating food and having a nice time, and then boom, undead horsemen come in murdering people, desperate to find the ring. And again, it taps into that sense of urgency so perfectly, and it really drives home that central plot, which is this is the Lord of the Rings. It's not the Lord of the Four Hobbits messing about in the Shire. It's about that main plot, and it really gets you there a lot faster, which I think I agree with you in that sense. It really does trim the fat.
And I think from like the writing standpoint, how accessible they make it. Like I think they knew pretty much early on that we need to open with some kind of exposition. You know, the prologue. We need like a 7-minute that would be unheard of in any film. A 7 to 8 minute, just shy of 10-minute sequence where it's just going into the history of everything. And I'd like fair play to the writers. Could you imagine sifting through this, through unfinished tales, through the Silmarillion? God knows what else they had to sift through, and go, right, we need to take all of that history and condense that into like a 7-page treatment. It's outstanding, and I think it does it very well. Even scenes in the book like the Council of Elrond, which is basically a whole chapter of exposition, that they keep the core elements that you need that further the story, There is obviously world building in there, but I think that it's not hand holding, but I definitely feel like it's accessible to the average moviegoer, while still kind of highlighting how expansive this world is. And obviously beyond the films, when you get into the book territory, it's unparalleled.
Extensive is an understatement. Yeah.
And
no, I think
sorry,
go on.
No, go on.
I'll say the Council of Elrond is a great example of one of these brilliant settings. Fellowship to me is all about setting things up. Like, nothing really happens in Fellowship. Sorry, Boromir, but you're really not that important. Other than Boromir, nothing really happens that significant in Fellowship until right at the very end. Like, you have the splitting of the party and all the rest of it. But up until that, it's mostly set up. And I think the Council of Elrond is one of those brilliant moments of just absolutely, like, crystalline genius, because like I say, like it's what, probably a 10-minute sequence scene, I'd say, the Council of Elrond overall, thereabouts.
Yeah, something like that.
And at the end of it, you have this a large ensemble cast. 9 people is a lot of people, and at the end of this, you know exactly who each member of the Fellowship is, why they're joining this band, why they're searching here, what their flaws are, what their bonds are, and exactly why they're needed, why they're an important part of the story. And it's all laid out so clearly and so concisely without no one ever has to say, I'm doing this because I want to save my people. It's clear in every aspect of what they do. You know that Boromir is there because he needs it to save his people. He will do anything to save the people of Gondor. And he doesn't, I don't believe he ever outright says that, but it's clear in the way he's trying to take that conversation, that's the reason he's there. He doesn't really care about the rest of the people in Middle Earth. He's doing it for his people. And that's such a crucial core aspect of his character that is laid out so clearly and so beautifully. And the same was said for every other member of the Fellowship. You see exactly who Gimli is when he just stands up and tries to smash the ring. A brilliant scene, because you know exactly then who Gimli is and exactly what he is. Is that in the books? I'm not sure if it is. Gimli trying to smash the ring. It's been a long time since I've read it. But either way, it's such a brilliant moment of characterization.
And it shows so much, that scene as well. It shows the influence that the ring has on corrupting people when they will start arguing. You've got all the different factions as well. That is pretty much your introduction to the other party. Like Gimli and Boromir. It sets up sort of like dissension in the ranks pretty much early on with Boromir's character. The kind of inner racism between dwarves and elves, the mistrust between them, and this unlikely band, this fellowship that is formed, setting out. It's a scene that has to do so much and could easily be bogged down and almost seems impossible to adapt the way that the book does it. But I think they found a very excellent way to do it. And, talking about Boromir, if I am going to pick a favorite character from this film in particular, it would be Boromir. And again, an aspect about the films that I prefer to the book. I know it's kind of all there in the book, but Boromir's never really given much of a focus. And the structure's different as well, based on like the beginning of the Two Towers book compared to where this film ends. When it comes to this film, I mean, Sean Bean's just fantastic.
Absolutely,
one of the best actors there is. And to me, it's not only the best death scene in cinema history, it's the best you got Darth Vader. That's an argument. That could be a battle of brackets.
Yeah,
it's one of the best redemption arcs told in film. And his character is pretty much introduced in like the last half of the film. In terms of scenes, like the arc that his character goes through, and that's not even counting the extended edition scenes that we get, that completely recontextualize his character that we get in Two Towers and glimpses in Return of the King. From this film alone, this character has one of the most compelling character arcs there is, and he's a supporting character. It's absolutely tremendous. And then by the time you get to the end, I mean, my God, if you're not like shedding manly tears, I question you. It's
one of those things though. Like as a child, I am sorry, Boromir. I didn't appreciate you as a child. I thought you sucked. I thought you were the worst. I didn't get it. I didn't understand
what
Legolas, you were facing.
Legolas was so cool.
Legolas was so cool, and I stand by. He is still so cool.
He is.
But yeah, no, Boromir, and Faramir as well. And we'll talk about that in the Two Towers. Are such stunningly written characters. Like you say, and they are supporting characters because. But the point of Boromir is that he is the best. He was meant to be the best of men. Gondor is the average sort of guy, and Boromir was the best of them. And again, you see that later on in scenes of the Two Towers and Return of the King, and his entire arc. He was basically just set up to fail, to show how even the strongest of men can fall to the ring he was really there as a foil to Aragorn to show how perfect Aragorn is as a human being, and his arc is such a tragic one because it's out of desperation and like nobility and all. Oh, there are so many. We could have an entire hour-long conversation on just Boromir's characterization because it is stunning. And the fact that in the books he dies off screen is unacceptable. Like you say, like the way he goes down. Fine. Again, Lurtz as a character, an original character by Peter Jackson, and one of my favorite characters in the trilogy because he's without. I don't think does he speak at any point in the films.
Only
I think
few lines where he's like Saruman.
Yeah,
you know,
I think other than
like that's pretty much it. Beyond that, I think. Definitely.
And he is still, in my opinion, one of the most compelling villains we've had in cinema. Like he's just honestly terrifying. His final fight with Aragorn is terrifying. Like, and I can't remember the name of the actor who plays him.
Oh God!
That's a deep cut there.
I think his name is New Zealand stunt actor. I think.
Yeah, and he's brilliant.
Yeah,
the physicality that he brings to the role is stunning. And again, that fight scene with Boromir and just the execution almost of Boromir is devastating.
Well, he goes in for that execution shot, doesn't he? Like,
yeah, exactly. If it was
3 arrows, and he's there point blank, ready to put that right through his face. And again, that's having sort of like creative licensing with the Lord of the Rings. It doesn't have to be identical. I go so far as to say, if you made this identical to the book, it would have nowhere near the impact that this film does with that moment.
You creating. Sorry,
God, I was
going to say if you open Two Towers with Boromir just lying there dead on the side of the river, I'm like, oh, he died.
Yeah,
that wasn't clear. All right, okay.
And it might work for the book, but it certainly doesn't work for a visual medium, especially when you're, as a writer, as an audience member, you're meant to be connecting with these characters. And that sort of like fictional creating of an antagonist, the film needs an antagonist. This one works way more than what The Hobbit does for me. Again, I don't want to compare the two too much. When you've got the likes of Azog and Bolg, and that felt very tacked on and didn't feel necessary to the plot inherently. And also, like, I'd go so far as to say the final fight between Lurtz and Aragorn in this film that goes on for maybe 30 seconds at a sort of just shy of a minute is way more intense than any of the stuff that happens in The Hobbit. Like that fight on the ice at the end of the third movie, in Battle of the Five Armies, it lacks the impact, it lacks the grit, and obviously that's the reliance on CGI. Feels very weightless. This one, across the board, it's that beautiful blend between CGI that I'm still clamoring for now. And we get it with a few films, Mad Max Fury Road.
Oh, exactly the one I was going to mention, yeah.
When it is that beautiful dance between CGI and practical.
Yeah.
It holds up so well. And this film, 20 years on, holds up so well.
Still looks stunning. There are so few shots where I look at it and I'm like, oh, yeah, this is 20 years old, actually. There are a few mixed in there, don't get me wrong. You can't perfect everything. But like the wide majority of that film, if that released today, I'd be like, yeah, this is still a very high quality film.
And I think that's like the film grain. Like shooting on film makes such a difference. It really does. And even like with the visual effects, we'll be talking about it in just a second. They were developing new things with this film, new technologies that we take for granted now. Obviously, they've gone beyond the capabilities of what they were when they were made, but it started from this point. The whole, I think probably with the Two Towers actually. I forgot the name of the engine, but where they is the AI.
When I was in university, I wrote a paper about it, about the way that it was developed, because it was such a revolutionary form of computer engineering almost. Again, I'll talk about this more in the Two Towers. It's another one of the reasons it's my favorite of the trilogy. But like the way that they push the boundary, like you say, this innovation that these films created is absurd, honestly.
Yeah, and it's you pick and choose when you use it, and it looks incredible. We'll talk about that in a second. The last thing that I'll say about the cast, I mean, as you mentioned, we could talk an hour just on Boromir alone, maybe even more, and let alone the massive.
Yeah, we can't spend all of it, unfortunately.
But what I love about it the most is, and sort of like going to the conventions and stuff like that and seeing the people, you get the idea. These were people just doing a job. It obviously means a lot to the people, and a lot of the cast members are still friends and in communication with each other, but you do get the sense of, right, we're getting paid for this, we show up, we do our thing, we get out of costume, we're done for the day. But when you're a viewer and you connect with it so much, it's like these people are these characters, and it's weird seeing them outside of that setting, knowing that it was just a day job for a lot of them. But more so than any other film, especially when you see the behind the scenes as well, because they filmed all three of these back to back. I think this film went into pre-production around 1997, I think it was. I know that's when storyboards were being made, and costumes and props were being built and everything like that. But Peter Jackson allowed, especially the four hobbits, time to socialize with each other before they even rolled the cameras. He was like, I want you to sort of get to know each other, get to know each other's personalities. And obviously the personalities of the characters in the film are going to be very different, but he gave them that time to sort of like connect with each other, to get that sense of camaraderie in the film. And what I love about it now is when you see these reunion videos or whatnot, if you watch the Friendship Onion with Billy Boyd and Dominic Monaghan on YouTube, I love that this film has created that bond between them. So not only do you get the bond between the fellowship of the characters on screen, it feels more real and special because you know that so many of them have connections and friendship built from these films in real life and continue to do so as well.
Yeah, it's hard to overstate like the bond that these people do genuinely seem to share, like in real life. Obviously, there's the very famous the fact that all of them, with the exception of John Rhys Davis, have the tattoo for the friend somewhere on their body.
Yeah.
Which I'll be honest, I've had a lot of jobs with lots of different people. I've never felt at the end of my career at a job, I'm like, lad, should we all get a joint tattoo? Yeah, should we all have the same thing?
We're not
somewhere
quite at
on our
that
bodies?
stage yet, are we?
No, I don't think I'm quite. I don't think I've ever really felt that share again. Like you say, it's just a job. I think for most of them, it's got to be more than just a job. Like there's clearly some sense of like passion. Like you said, it was essentially almost like what 3-4 years, just sort of basically living with these people, like day in day out. Like these are the only people that, well, the cast obviously that you really interact with, and these are just through sheer exposure. These are going to become some of the closest people like in your life. And like you say, there are some of them now that are still clearly such close friends and so interrelated, and the fact that that comes through so clearly, like so palpably on the show, like in the films rather, not the show, especially in towards the later films when you have these aspects of like the party splitting and things like that, and particularly with Frodo and Sam, like that sense of brotherhood, I think is like it's almost impossible to manufacture, and the fact that the cast were able to so compellingly create something like that is just it's miraculous. It's and maybe I'm struggling to put it into words, but just this unit, like it is an ensemble cast at the end of the day. It's what we were talking about before, like the fact that you can't really single out any of them because all of them just, as far as I can tell, any of them are welcome to ring me up and tell me wrong, but all of them seem to give it their all.
Yeah.
They wanted to be there, and it just shows in every single scene.
It's a sense of like all being in it together, isn't it? And I know there were injuries on this set. I'm not going to talk about the obvious one in Two Towers. That's going to be my goal. When we get to Two Towers, I'm not mentioning the scene that everyone mentions, but pushing through it. And we've got a job to do. Let's get through it. We're all friends. We're all comrades in this, essentially getting through it. And I love that there is that real life connection as well, and especially when you get to Return of the King and you're watching behind the scenes, you're fighting back tears, and Christopher Lee stands up to everyone and gives a speech and says like, "You are the greatest cast and crew that I have ever worked on," and like he's fighting back tears and I'm fighting back tears, or I'm already gone at that point. It's like a special bond that I've never. It sounds really corny, but I've never seen that in films. No. Of course, like friendships have been formed from films and everything, but never to this level. And even if it has, it's never been documented in terms of like special features and everything like that. But yeah, we should probably move on from the cast, as I mentioned.
Yeah,
I feel bad. No. We haven't talked about Liv Tyler. We haven't talked about Cate Blanchett, but just sort of as a blanket.
We really talked about Christopher Lee. I mean, honestly, again, it is such a powerhouse cast that we will have to move on, or we'll be here for the next 4 days.
Well, I think the last thing I'll say about it, like Christopher Lee, I think he was the only cast member that had
met Tolkien.
And didn't Tolkien give him his blessing to like play Gandalf or
something?
He
said if these are ever made into a film, I would like you to play Gandalf. And so the Peter Jackson actually knew this and approached him, was like, "So do you want the role of Gandalf?" And Christopher Lee said, "I don't want to ride a horse." And so that's why he's not. That's why he wasn't Gandalf, because he didn't really fancy riding a horse. So he said, "I'll be Saruman instead."
And if Christopher
And thank God he did, because
I
I
don't
think,
want to ride a horse. Christopher Lee isn't riding a horse. Like,
yeah,
yes,
that's it. It's
like
simple as that. Like, oh, all right, Christopher. Sorry. Yep. As you were. Sorry, mate. Move on. And again, thank God he didn't, because as much as I love Christopher Lee, I think he's a far more compelling Saruman than he is a Gandalf. And again, I don't think Ian McKellen would have been able to do Saruman as well as Christopher Lee did. I think, again, the casting, as we've mentioned it a few times now, was absolutely perfect. I think we can leave it at that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We'll move on, because I know that we're coming up to an hour on this thing. This is going to be an epic review. We warned you from the beginning, guys.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the visual effects then. So it's oof, here we go. So
to be fair, we've already touched on quite a lot of these things already. So the visual effects.
We have. This is where I get to kind of nerd out and go, that creature looks cool. But I remember when I got the 4-disc DVD, and it's split into all the different sections. There's like armor creation, adapting Tolkien's writings, the cast. It's all split into the different branches. My favorite one on every single subsequent film was always the creature. Was like Weta Workshop, was Weta Digital, and specifically the creature section as well. So with this film, you had the treat of the Watcher in the water. We had the water horses when they sweep the ring wraiths away at the Bruinen. You have the Watcher in the water, the cave troll, the Balrog, and it's that portion of the film. The Watcher into the cave troll into the Balrog. That has been, even when I watched it for the first time, still remains my favorite sequence from this film. Even from the books, that is my favorite chapter, the whole Mines of Moria section. So I was always fascinated by like mythical creatures and everything in creature design. And honestly, this film has some of the best I've ever seen. Well, all of the films do, but my God, the Balrog might be the coolest creature I've ever seen in film history.
Especially when you go back and look at the source material, though, because I believe in the books it just basically says like, it's like 10 feet tall, it's like a pretty buff dude or something like that. Like it's really vague in like the description of it. It's just a big guy who's kind of on fire and has a sword. And then Peter Jackson saw that, was like, what about if instead we made it 600 feet tall and made of smoke and ash and fire, and it has a whip that's on fire and a big sword, and it's awesome.
I just love that idea that Tolkien wrote the line, he's just a really buff dude.
I mean, I don't necessarily have the same way with words that Tolkien did, but I think I capture his spirit.
That's basically how he describes Tulkas in the Silmarillion, for a deep cut reference there, who is basically Chris Hemsworth in the Silmarillion. It's that moment, and even now, I've seen the film countless times. I'd actually love to know how many times I've actually watched these films. If I could have like a little counter ticking up in my head.
I really don't want to know, because if I look at the amount of hours that I've spent consuming Lord of the Rings media, I think it would send me into a downward spiral of some kind.
Never a bad thing. It's never a bad thing. But I still get that same sense of awe, especially if anyone's lucky to see this on the big screen. I was really hoping it would be back in cinemas this weekend for the 20th anniversary, and it's playing nowhere. I think it's playing in the Prince Charles Cinema in London in about 2 hours' time from now. I'm wondering if we can wrap this up.
Yeah, we should nip down. Yeah, it's
nice
and quick.
But that moment where the Balrog rises up out of the smoke, lands, and roars into the camera, and that sound, you can watch the behind the scenes, how they did the sound design. I think they dragged like this big stone concrete block along like a tunnel or something to get the reverberation. It's amazing sound design, everything across this film. But that moment where you're front on with a Balrog, it's been foreshadowed, it's like, Moria, you fear to go into those mines, and it's, what is this monster of shadow and flame? The pacing of the action scene as well throughout Moria, how it's the Jaws effect, right? It's the tease, like you don't see it, you hear it. You see reactions to people. All the orcs are even scared.
Yeah, I would say that scene when the goblins just like they're surrounded. It's like, oh, how are they going to get out of this one? They've got no hope. There's thousands of them, and then they just leave because the bad guys are that terrified of whatever this is. That's visual storytelling. Like that's show not tell at its finest. It's just.
And the staircase sequence that follows it right afterwards, in the script it said like there is an action scene on the stairs, or that they go down the stairs, and then Peter Jackson takes that and makes it into this huge elaborate thing. But it's how it's paced and the intensity of it. It's breaking through. We still don't see it. We know this thing's big. It's like caving in the walls around it. Even Gandalf, who has been, the mentor figure, go to like your classic hero's journey kind of thing. Even he's terrified. This all-powerful wizard who's, has faced many dangers, but he's
especially if you've
terrified.
like read The Hobbit as well, and you know that Gandalf is, for all intents and purposes, a lesser god. Like
Yeah.
he's a lesser god that got sent to the Earth to make sure everything's okay, and he is like bricking it, like at the thought of at the thought of this creature. He's just no, gotta get out. Not even a little bit. Goodbye. We're going. No, not a chance. And like it just is a perfect setup for what this thing is, especially when you think about how little the Balrog's actually in the film. Like you say, like the actual visual effect of the Balrog is probably there for like less than 2 minutes, I think, of
Yeah.
screen time the Balrog actually has. And it is still, when you talk about Lord of the Rings, that will be one of the first things you come to is the Balrog. That is how amazing that was.
Absolutely. And going to like the conceptual design as well, Alan Lee and John Howe, who are like among my favorite artists of all time. Alan Lee, I think I know they both collaborated on the same things, but I think Alan Lee was predominantly on the architecture of everything, and that's a big thing as well. Like,
oh well, yeah,
each province of people, location, race, you just have to look at the architecture and you immediately
know exactly what they are. Yeah.
When you get to Khazad-dûm, it's the very square and angular columns and everything, and the runes and.
Yeah, that's the thing. When people talk about like how Tolkien base is the grandfather of fantasy, and I absolutely agree. Like basically every fantasy series we've had since then has in some way ripped off Tolkien. I think people underestimate how much of that comes from the films. That idea of the elven, like sort of like the Grey Havens, obviously also about like the third film, and like that those sleek elven long ships and the architecture, like the twisting of like wood coming together and all the rest of it, and then these harsh stone with the dwarves and everything being very blocky, and again like the man sort of like carving out of the mountain Minas Tirith, which again obviously isn't in this film, but that idea of like visual design of visual uniqueness that is like so instantly recognizable. Like you could show me like you could show me like you could show me the floor of one of the buildings probably in Lord of the Rings. I'll be able to tell you exactly like where that is, but that's clearly Edoras. Come on, guys.
Yeah,
like,
it's outstanding, and I think John Howe as well. Both of them did environments. I know that, but I think John Howe was more. Even the armor as well. It's not just the architecture; it's the dress, it's the wardrobe, and the costume department for this film is incredible. Christ knows how many costumes they had to produce for this thing. Copies. You had the smaller actors that you have to do like scale costumes for those. You have the actors, the stunt. Just
the amount of orcs on screen at any given time, all of which have to be in full armor, full makeup, full prosthetics. Like, yeah, honestly.
And even like the forced perspective, which is huge across these films, and sadly something that again, come the Hobbit films and the advances in technology, I guess you don't have to do that now. You can just shoot someone in front of a green screen in two different separate studios, composite it onto each other. And I know there was compositing and stuff that went on with this film, but the fact that they were using tricks of the trade and all these sleight of hands and everything, moments where you've got the actors in Brie at the bar and someone will walk past them and look huge, and they just have like a really tall guy in like massively like over proportioned arms, like rubber arms, walking past, and you see it in the behind the scenes and it looks terrible. In the film it looks fantastic. And I think with the Hobbit and everything being in 3D at the time, which was the big 3D craze, you can't get away with that because you would see you'd be able to peek behind the curtain and the illusion would fall apart instantly. But you watch Lord of the Rings now, when they're at the table and that the table's like halfway across the room from each other off at an angle and the actors aren't even looking at each other. But through the magic of filmmaking, it's incredible.
It's seamless,
And this is like one of there are a lot of films actually that I kind of have this with, but this is sort of like the number one film for me, all of them. Whenever I watch this film, I don't even know how this was possible. You watch many films, it's just like, just point the camera or the CGI there or anything. The level of complexity across all avenues of this film, every single aspect, like day one, pre-production. Where do you start with this thing? Like and I have to keep every time I watch it, I can't believe what I'm seeing on screen. That this was produced by people.
People sat down and they thought, okay, this is how we're going to do this scene, and like they didn't copy it or steal. There was no written down guide of how to do it. They did it. They made the guide. They said, okay, we're going to figure out how to do this scene. Like, don't worry, I'm not saying they invented these techniques. These techniques have been around for a long time, but they sat down and they're like, okay, this is how to do. This is how we're going to make this scene. This is how we're going to like arrange everything, and this is how we're going to construct the set. This is how we're going to do it to make it all look just this seamless. And they did. Again, there's no coffee cups on the set of Lord of the Rings. You know, it is perfect. The set design, all of it. The costuming is so good. How iconic is every single like it is the garb of all of the Fellowship. Every single one of them is visually distinct, but also because of those lovely elven cloaks, has that sense of like belonging and community, and it's all so iconic. Like you show me a silhouette of, you could probably show me a silhouette of the 4 different hobbits, and I could tell you which one they are because of the slight differences in the way that their armor, and the way that they were built, and the way that they structured things. It's just so. I just don't understand how it's this good and how it's still this good. How I can watch this. I can probably watch this film tomorrow night and think, this is amazing. I could just have spent probably like an hour chatting to you about this, and I can sit back and be like, yes, let's watch it again. Let's do it again, and I will still be blown away by the things I've just spent an hour talking about. But like, wow, I forgot about this. But this is so.
Yeah. So I know we're going to come to the end of this review and be like, we didn't talk about that, didn't talk about that. We could have talked about that even more. But I guess I'll throw a question your way. You know, we're talking about, you know, breaches and stuff. Do you, across all 3 films now, not necessarily pertaining to this one, do you have a favorite environment across all of them?
Oh, environments are how I thought you were going in creature, and I had creature. Environment.
Oh, go on. What's your favorite creature?
I love the Mumakil. I think they're great. I think they're fantastic. I think they're underrated, personally. I think they're such a cool thing because it was such like a slice of home, if that makes sense. Whereas you see like it's elephants. Everyone knows what an elephant is, but they're not quite elephants, and it's just that idea of having this sort of sense of familiarity and then having that twisted, I just absolutely adored. I thought that was. But I'll talk more about that. I think, to be honest, if I was talking about like my favorite from a visual aspect, most of that does come from the later 2 films in the trilogy. I mean, I love the Shire. The setting of the Shire is absolutely stunning. It's brilliant, and it is the most comforting thing in the world. But I don't think it didn't blow me away in the same way some of the later things didn't have the same degree of spectacle. And something I can appreciate a lot more now that I'm older, because I'm certainly. I understand now why Bilbo was so annoyed to be dragged out of his comfortable home to go on an adventure. When as a kid, I was like, "What are you talking about, Bilbo? They're gonna go fight a dragon. That sounds awesome." Whereas now we're like, "I'm gonna chill at home and have some tea." Yeah.
It's like, no, you can't even get me on a night out now.
No,
you know,
honestly,
it's like, oh, I'm staying in the warm. I'm an old man now. I'm a hobbit.
But yeah, so
it is that sort of like homely quality, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think that's, you know, intrinsic. You know, hobbits are your kind of face of what the everyday kind of person is, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's so key to Tolkien's mythology. Like, it's the thing that a lot of later fantasy novels missed, because the point of Tolkien wasn't that it wasn't about heroes and villains in the same way that a lot of later fantasy novels is. If this was a book written post Tolkien, Aragorn would have fought Sauron in a one-on-one duel and defeated him with the sword of heroes,
which he very nearly did in Return of the King.
And thank God they didn't. The mouth of Sauron was like good enough. That was fine. I enjoyed that little bit of back and forth. And again, that's only an extended cut scene, and that would have been terrible. Or an awful decision, because it completely undermines the whole idea of Tolkien, which is that like the smallest people can have the greatest impact, and it taps into his beliefs and obviously his time work in the war and his time in Birmingham and these very rundown working class areas, and his background in that sort of perspective and all the rest of it. And I think again, Hobbiton and the Shire is just so. I think in this film, there's Moria. Damn it, Chris! There's so many good parts. Yeah.
Although we don't get to see Moria in its heyday, I mean, there is still beauty there when you get to the city of Dwaradelf and you get that beautiful.
Yeah, but I mean, like, the bridge of Khazad-dûm is such a is such an iconic thing to me, and there's the Inn of the Prancing Pony, and again, I know it's an inn. That's all it is, but some of the cinematography in that is, I think, some of the things that stand with me the most. That one shot of Strider sitting in the back with his hood up, smoking the pipe. Eyes. Yeah, I think that is, of all the scenes in Lord of the Rings, that's the one that I can clearly visualize now in my head. It is been ripped off by so many things. It is the epitome of the edgy stranger in a hood. It's perfect, and yeah, so In conclusion, Chris, all of it.
All
I
of it.
love all
Oh, that's
every environment. My favorite environments, I think, are in Return of the King. So I'll save
okay.
the big discussions till then. But from this one, the Shire definitely stands out to me. But I think it's hard to separate the visuals from the music, which I think is something we're going to be coming on to very shortly. But
We
before
are.
that, what is your favorite visuals, Chris? Sorry, I completely
My
spoke over you
favorite.
there.
No, it's cool. My favorite creature is the Balrog. It's just,
Yeah, that's
you
fair.
know, and I know we're talking about Two Towers next time, but oh my Christ, that opening scene. That's just where I'm going to leave that there for now. But my favorite environment. See, I want to say the Shire, but I basically
Yeah.
live in the Shire and I've lived in lived in the Shire my whole life, and I'm like Bilbo. I need an adventure. I need to say something else. So I'm not going to say the Shire, although it is absolutely idyllic and beautiful and everything
Yeah.
we want the Shire to be in the sense of home. I'm going to be bored. I'm going to say Rivendell. There's just that, like that again, that score kicking in, that elegant beauty of it. You've
Yeah.
got the beautiful vistas of it, the trees and the mountains, and I mean, don't get me wrong. I think I'd get bored there if I had to live there the whole time.
Sorry, I've just thought of one. That
Go on.
I agree with Rivendell. I just realised that, but it's made me think of the far better Elvish settlement, which is Lothlorien, and I can't believe I didn't think of Lothlorien. Yeah, that one. Sorry, that one wins. I take back everything I said. Lothlorien is absolutely stunning. I absolutely love Lothlorien. That whole sequence is just.
One
like
day in Lothlorien, you would become a hippie, like instantly, wouldn't you? Like it would just happen. You know, it'd be dream catchers, it'd be chakras, it'd be all of that stuff, wouldn't it?
Honestly, I forgot how much, because I never really cared for Rivendell. I don't really like Elrond. I think he's very pompous. You know, I'm not a fan of him. Again, give me all the hate. I don't care. But I always loved Lothlorien because they felt like the cool elves. They felt like the elves were just they were just chilling out. They were weird and mystical, and they were high all the time, and they looked into mirrors and saw the future. And they were being weird about it, but like they felt a lot more interesting to me because they were so much more alien compared to say the Rivendell elves, which were just kind of pompous humans for the most part.
Well, we could go down a very deep lore.
Yeah, I know, but
as to why that is, but the fact that
we shouldn't, Chris. We mustn't.
We probably will, you know, Quenya and Sindarin and all that stuff. You know,
Yeah, no, I thought Lothlorien. I think for me, the big thing about Lothlorien is the lighting, because obviously it's perpetually like dark there with that silvery light and the silvery bluish light the entire time. And then Sam's little speech when he stands up and has the little speech about Gandalf and has this little poem and like, yeah, it's brilliant. Lothlorien actually is stunning set design.
Like they actually look like they're glowing, which was a big part of it as well. And again, you know, because they've seen the light of the two trees in Valinor, I get it.
I know,
but the fact that attention to detail and, you know, for any casual moviegoer, they're not going to know that. But the fact that it's there in the visuals, like it's the red letter media thing. Like you may not have noticed it, but your brain did. Even the fact of like whenever they had Cate Blanchett in close up, they held up like twinkling fairy lights behind the camera that are then reflected in her eyes.
Yeah,
it's like crazy levels of detail. But I Lothlorien as well. And the score. Yeah. Let's talk about the score, shall we?
Please. I've been dying to talk about the score. Yeah. Howard Shaw, my man, you are an absolute god. Honestly, like when I think about Lord of the Rings, there are so many things I think about. But for me, the music of Lord of the Rings is just so iconic. Like there's something I can talk about, and I will talk about this a lot more in the Two Towers because the Rohan score is my favorite music I think in any film ever. But like the standard one for me, like the score is amazing. Obviously, got the Fellowship theme and all the rest of it. But like, let's start from the beginning. Let's have a chat about Concerning Hobbits, because that piece of music is just chef's kiss. It's perfect. It is just so amazing, and it's like we were talking about before with the Shire feeling like home. If you show me that shot in silence, that little opening sequence when they go through the Shire, I'm like, oh, this looks really nice. It's very pleasant. You know, it's a nice neighborhood. You whack on Concerning Hobbits, and all of a sudden that jovial sense of community, this sort of like the curious and impish nature of the hobbits, as well as their sort of like just country roots and all the rest of it. It's the most comforting music I think in the world. If you put that on right now, I think I just want to wrap myself for a nice blanket cup of tea. Let's just settle down and let's just enjoy this experience because it feels like home. I've never had a piece of music that feels like home in the same way that Concerning Hobbits did.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you know, similar to sort of the conceptual design in terms of the architecture being able to define it, what Howard Shaw was able to produce with the score for this thing, I mean, I would go so far as to say this isn't even a score. This is an opera. He produced 3 full-scale operas, as far as I'm concerned. His score alone, this is going to sound really corny, but I genuinely believe it does. Take the film out of the equation. If you just listen to the soundtrack, all 3 of them, beginning to end, that tells the story just as well as the written page does, just as well as the film does. So many of these moments in the film you can't even imagine without the score, and music is intrinsic to filmmaking.
Absolutely.
And nothing is truer for the Lord of the Rings. Easily, if you're going to do like a Mount Rushmore in terms of like film scores, this would be on there. Like this is up there with any of like Williams's scores.
Yeah,
and you
absolutely.
could even argue maybe surpasses in many ways. I would even go so far as to say I don't want to compare composers in that way because they're very good at what they do.
Oranges,
but how, like, even through music, he's able to establish history, leitmotif, races, provinces, different ages, like everything, like he is able to achieve with this. And if you look at Howard Shore's previous scores, not saying any of his previous scores are bad by any stretch of the imagination, but predominantly starts in the horror genre, and that's where his bread and butter is. He produced the soundtracks for Scanners, Videodrome, The Fly, Seven, and I want to say Silence of the Lambs as well. I think he did. Yeah, he did do the sort of score for that.
Yeah.
So a lot of horror elements, and even a lot of those elements do come into play in the Lord of the Rings as well. Especially when you get to Shelob in Return of the King. Very similar beats as to what.
He's very, very good at establishing that sense of dread. I think in a lot of his films, like the Ring Race, I think in general, were enhanced so much by the score and that ominous sort of imposing it. But again, that leans so much into the visuals of it as well, and the lighting and all the rest of it. Like the presentation of the film is just stunning. Sorry, I interrupted you mid-flow.
No, you're absolutely fine. Tempo changes, rhythm, cadence, everything. Oh my god, this is unfathomable. Like just the score alone. Howard Shore's a genius, and again, a composer that beyond the Lord of the Rings, I haven't really paid much attention to.
Not really at all.
Until
you started listing those films, I couldn't have told you a single other film that he'd scored other than Lord of the Rings. But it's bizarre because he did such an outstanding job.
Yeah, it's marvelous, and it's got to the point now where I can just listen to any track.
Oh yeah.
And you can quote along the film. Know every beat, every moment to it. It's become absolutely synonymous with it. And that was another thing with the soundtracks as well, in that when the films were coming out, I was really big into my film music, still am. And bought the individual soundtracks to it, and then it's like, oh, here's a 4 CD complete score. Here's like the 3.5 hours worth of music from this film. There you go. They bought the vinyls out a couple of years ago as well, the 5 LP vinyl collections, which is absolutely beautiful. But yeah, what has been produced, and hopefully, fingers crossed, this year. I mean, I've had these tickets now for about 2 years, thanks COVID. But the Albert Hall in London, they're doing Fellowship of the Ring in concert now. Unfortunately, it's only the theatrical, so that's going to be a very strange experience watching those again. Going back to what you said at the beginning, like once you go extended, you never go back.
There's no going back. Yeah, that's it.
And some of my favorite musical cues actually are from the extended editions, and a lot of those scenes are.
I mean, a lot. If memory serves, a lot of Lothlorien was in the extended cut. There were like a lot of little sequences, and again, I always thought the music and the presentation of Lothlorien felt so alien, like you say, because obviously Middle Earth is meant to be the history of our world in theory.
Mm-hmm.
But so a lot of that felt like it was based in reality. Like the dwarves felt like they could exist beneath the ground right now, and the elves felt like they could be living out in the forest somewhere. But Lothlorien, as an element to me, always felt so alien that it felt like it was impossible for it to coexist. And I think the music is such an important part of that choir that sort of feeds through every part of it, and that soft sort of undertone of dissonance, almost the fact that like it just feels so strange, and that's present so often. The March of the Elves is another fantastic piece of music, and all the rest of it. I mean, the theme for Lord of the Rings, the theme of the Fellowship, like that is the soundtrack to my childhood. Every time I was playing in the woods near my house, I'd be humming along that, like hitting it, fighting my mates with sticks, like pretending to be Aragorn and Legolas and all the rest of it. Like would be singing it out loud because it's not right without the music. You can pretend to do the scenes all you want, but if the music's not there, it's not right. It's not complete. It is stunning. Don't quote me on this, but I believe after the Wedding March. Concerning Hobbits is the most popular music to walk
Oh
down the
wow,
aisle
that's
to,
cool.
because it is that important to that many people. It is so iconic, and again, it has that sensation of home, warmth, and it is honestly like such a masterful score that I can't even begin I again, this is another one of these little facets of the films that I could sit here and talk about all day, because we could listen to the entire soundtrack right now, me and you, Chris, and I could be like, the reason this one's good is because it does, like,
And there are video essays out there on
yeah,
YouTube
and
that
I'm
you can
sure there
watch, and
are,
I've
yeah,
watched them, and they're fantastic. And
yeah,
hopefully people will produce more. But going to that sense of like creating, getting the sense of the races and the cultures within Middle Earth, the use of the languages in the score as well. They use Tolkien's languages in there.
yeah,
You've got the language of Andernaic for men, in the Ringwraith theme, which ties back to their history of being kings
absolutely,
of
yeah,
men from that, age long ago. You've got various different languages of Elvish in there. Khuzdul, the Dwarven language, the chanting, it's very low and masculine, and used a lot of those New Zealand choirs in there. It's sublime. You've got like the heavenly sounds for the elves, you've got the low guttural sound, and then you've got the irregular beat march for the orcs, and it's very dissonant, and it's, I mean, way beyond my skills in terms of like music theory and everything out
yeah.
there. But as I say, there are videos out there. Go watch them; they're
Yeah,
fantastic.
you really should, because the amount that it's like we're saying this for every single part, but like the amount of love that is just poured into these films. Like these films are like, there are, again, I'm going to be sound like such like a almost better back in my day, but like there are so many films these days that feel like soulless. They feel almost like
Yes.
they're made by committee, like you say. The Hobbit is sadly an example of that, of a film that was made because they wanted to make money, because the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit is bankable. The
Mm.
Lord of the Rings wasn't bankable at the time it came out. In fact, it was the opposite of bankable. People were sick of like costume pieces. They were like, "No, we want CGI. That's what the kids are into these days. I don't want any of these long costume medieval drama stuff. That's old news." And like, and to be fair, it was like the Lord of the Rings was a swan song in that respect. It was the final magnificent last pulse of that sort of style of cinema that I don't think we've really seen since. But every part of this film has such love and care put into it. It was such a passion project from everyone involved that it's just, and it shows in the music again, in the sense that they put so much effort into like being consistent with the lore and the world and all the rest of it, and setting up those motifs that reappear over and over again. And I will talk about this for hours in the Two Fellowship, sorry, in the Two Towers one, and you can't stop me, because I'm going to talk about Rohan for like 3 hours,
Oh yeah.
Chris. It's happened, and you invited me on. This is your fault. You did
I'm
this.
going to be right there with you, man. Like Rohan's
Um,
epic. Like it's my favorite
it's
province. Yeah.
honestly, the music is so good for so many of these things, and like you say, like I could hear like a second of each of the motifs about, oh, yep, this is the bit with the elves, and oh, yep, this is a dwarven bit here, and
Mm.
I'll say the visual identity, but that's not right. The auditory identity
Oh, yeah.
Of these things is sublime, honestly.
Do you have a favorite beat of music within this film? Like that it could be a scene from a film. We'll talk about our favorite moments and scenes, but a particularly memorable bit of music within a moment of
I
this
mean,
film.
other than concerning hobbits, which I feel like I've already spoken way too much about. I love the Forge in Isengard. The din
Yeah.
din din din. That bit is just like I can hear it so clearly in the back of my head, and like, yeah. So I think Isengard, the idea of like, again, like just the sound of it, especially with obviously the actual practical sounds of like the hammering and everything, like it feels
Mhm.
so industrial
Yes. Yeah.
compared to like some of the things that we've heard before. And obviously that's a big one of the big themes of Isengard and Saruman as a nation, if you will.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I think the score there was absolutely sublime. So I think concerning Hobbits, number one, but definitely Isengard is well up there. Yeah. What about
Um,
yourself?
there's two moments. I mean, the whole score is amazing. But if I had to
Well, yeah.
pick two moments that kind of stick out to me that I find that I hum quite a lot from this film, um, the Ringwraith theme. The dun dun
Yeah.
dun dun, dun, and it builds and builds and
Yeah.
builds, and it's terrifying.
Again,
It's
that sense of dread, it's just so
yeah,
palpable.
especially that chase scene, where you've got all the ring wraiths like gunning after Liv Tyler, Arwen's character. Again, a big change from the book. No Glorfindel in this one. I'm fine with it. I think it works.
It's cool. Yeah, it's fine.
I understand why they did it. Absolutely. I mean, you do have that. It's a weird kind of progression for Arwen's character. I mean, Arwen is more or less absent from the books. She's barely in those books, and I do like that they dialed up her character. Again, not to get into it too much, but very different approaches to the female characters between their treatment in the Lord of the Rings films compared to Toriel's character in The Hobbit.
I mean, but even then, like, there are many. One of the main criticisms of the Lord of the Rings is the handling of female characters in general, because there are three. Like, they're just like, the issue. It's not that they're not well written. All of the major female characters, especially in the films, far more so than the books, are very interesting characters and all have completely different places in the world. There just isn't many of them, and that is one of the biggest criticisms. But I think that scaling up of Arwen's character is a fantastic decision in that regard, because in the book she's just the hot elf girl that Aragorn gets with, predominantly. So it's a far more interesting arc to see her as this warrior princess almost kind of character.
And that's kind of the weird shift, is that in this film, yes, she is like Xena warrior princess, and then the next two films, she's much more akin to her book counterpart, where she is kind of that doting elf waiting for her man to return to her, basically.
Yeah.
They add an element of drama there. Kind of gets weird, like her fate is tied to the fate of the ring, who only gets to return the king, which is a little bit strange. But
yeah, I'll be honest. I think one of my biggest criticisms, even to this day, is I still don't really understand what Elrond was going on about when he was having the chat with Arwen in Return of the King. I'm like, right, so you're saying that if the ring goes, she'll die, but then not really. But then she won't. But magic is leaving Middle Earth, so immortality is leaving with it. But also, not for Arwen though. She's fine because she needs to stay alive to watch Aragorn die to punish her. That's important, apparently. Yeah, there are some like, and I know why. Obviously, you don't need to like. I can see you in your mind holding back the words of telling me why I'm wrong, Chris.
I know
the reasons, but it is one of those things where I do think a lot of the sort of storytelling later on does get a little bit more convoluted.
It's movie tension, isn't it? It's like got to ramp up the tension and everything like that. But I like that they do go into that relationship.
Yeah.
I mean, the chemistry between Liv Tyler and Vigo and those two characters.
Despite the fact they share basically one scene with each other, but you can well, there's a few flashbacks, but like the warmth that is brilliant.
I mean, right next to Gomez and Morticia Adams, as far as I'm concerned, Aragorn and Arwen is the best cinematic couple on screen.
And what was the other piece of music? Sorry, because I've gone way off track.
Oh, yeah, of course.
It was the ring wraiths. It's in
to
a very different discussion.
Of course, you have like the Fellowship theme playing full statement to the Bridge of Khazad-dûm, and they're gunning. But it's where they're going down the staircase, and you've got that dwarven chanting. It's like hoo, ho, 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 hoo, hoo. And it's just it's hearing that in the cinema, or just even at home, it's just so epic. I love that. I always get a kick out of that.
I think that's really interesting.
I know they're singing lyrics, and I'm just here like,
I think it's really interesting that the ones that you seem to like are the ones about that idea of tension. So you really like that sort of that build up to a release, whereas mine's are a lot more sort of like setting the scene. So it just goes to show that like
I love those too.
I yours, but I think it goes to show that like the different facets of this music, that it can do both of those things so well that two people will actually love both either side of them equally, and neither are wrong. They're both brilliant. Like there are lots of films that can do like, to use the Marvel example, Portals and Endgame obviously is a great piece of music, but it's a great piece of music because the scene is based around that music. Like that's all it is. That's what you're meant to be focusing on. Whereas I feel like a lot of time in Lord of the Rings, the music is just that perfect accompaniment to just enhance everything that you're seeing. And I think so few films can actually manage to juggle both elements of suspense and like quietness and ambience and the rest of it. And I think Lord of the Rings is just special in that way.
I think we'll talk about we need to talk about like the end credit music as well. So my girl Enya, one of my favorite female vocalists of all time, has two songs in the film. She has an Aeron, which plays over on topic.
Yeah, of course.
The love scene with Aragorn and Arwen on the bridge, which is just beautiful. Tugs at the heartstrings every time. It's like, I would rather share one lifetime with you than face all the ages of this world alone. You've got Enya playing and I'm crying.
It just works.
Happening. But may it be, now don't get me wrong, I love Gollum's song in Two Towers. Into the West, Annie Lennox is sublime. this is Enya is the sound of Middle Earth to me. She sounds Elven. I know she's like,
Yeah.
had an affinity for Lord of the Rings as well. Like, I think on one of her earlier albums, she has a song called Lothlorien.
Yeah.
You know, like, so she is like a Tolkien fan, but that ethereal, mystical voice, it's just, that is the cherry on top of this film.
Yeah,
like, the film doesn't
think...
just end after it cuts to black. Those credits, I'm still watching the credits for that music at the end to play us out.
I do think if there was one person in real life who, if they revealed to themselves they were actually a Tolkien elf this entire time and it was Enya, I'd be like, yeah, right, that tracks.
Yeah.
Yep, fair enough. Yep, cool.
All right. Or Tilda Swinton, maybe.
Yeah, actually, yeah,
Enya and Tilda Swinton.
Yeah.
David
the final two elves of the modern age. The 12th age will probably go up to that now, yeah.
I was going to say David Bowie, but again, talking about casting, he very nearly was cast as Elrond.
Yeah, again, and I'm sure it'd been fine, but Hugo Weaving is Hugo Weaving, so... Sorry, David.
I mean, if he had been given the gig, he not only played a goblin king, he played an elven kind of king as well.
He's making his way through the races. I don't think, however, he could have pulled off a dwarven king quite as convincingly.
Well, you know, we got hot dwarven kings come the Hobbit films, didn't we? They kind of broke the mold with that a little bit.
Yeah, but I wish we didn't.
Yeah, I know. I agree. Favorite moments and scenes, and we can't say the whole film. We could say the whole film. We're not going to, though. Do you have let's say 3 moments, because I think it's very unfair to say one. 3 favorite moments or scenes that stick out in your mind.
Okay. We're gonna have to do this one at a time because it's unfair. You're making me reveal all 3 at once. We're gonna have to go back and forth here.
Or even shots. You could say like you know.
I know. I'm trying to think, because there are just so many. To narrow it down to just 3 feels like I'm excluding the ones that are the ones that I'm not saying, rather than choosing my favorite. I think one of my favorite scenes is just the final act. If that's it's unfair to really claim so much as one scene, but you know exactly what I mean.
Scene.
Yeah, the passing of the Fellowship and that whole little sequence of like starting from obviously like Frodo and Boromir's confrontation, and Frodo interacting with Aragorn, and then the orcs come surging in. In fact, that's it. This scene, I'll narrow it down to just this one scene. That one scene of Aragorn walking in slow motion, holding the sword up in front of his face, and just going ham. It's perfect, because it feels so kingly, you know what I mean? Because a big part of like Aragorn's character is that he's this, especially in the films, he's this reluctant king. And to me, that one little scene of Frodo coming to him, he's just been betrayed by Boromir. He's like, Aragorn, what do I do? Can you take it? And Aragorn's like, no, he resists the temptation. You know from that moment on that no matter what happens, no matter how reluctant he is the king of Gondor. He is Isildur's heir. He has redeemed the entire line of man, and he's going to sit on that throne one day. And like then that one scene of coming surging in, he does the little like almost the salute, and then just that is such a. And again, another fantastic bit of show not tell. So that little conversation with Frodo and Aragorn directly into that final fight scene, I think, is absolutely stunning.
Oh my god! I want to try and pick a different scene. We've talked about Khazad-dûm quite a lot, and that probably, you shall not pass. That whole moment there is probably
obviously, of course.
Talked about Boromir's death, and that kind of continuing. I'm going to cheat like you and say many scenes that pass that moment.
Yeah.
But the whole breaking of the Fellowship on like the soundtrack, and we will not abandon Merry and Pippin to torment and death. Not while we have strength left. Let's hunt some orc. Yes, it's so great, and that music kicks in, and they're running into the woods. I really like a lot of the stuff with Ian McKellen and Ian Holm as well. Like, we haven't talked about Ian Holm all that much. The late great Ian Holm, but actually, perfect as Bilbo. Played 2 Bagginses in his career. Obviously, he did the voice in the BBC radio drama as Frodo Baggins in the, I want to say, the 70s. And then obviously as Bilbo. So I love those moments. The bit where they're smoking pipe weed, which is tobacco, for God's sake. I'm tired of everyone saying it's marijuana just because it's called a type of weed.
Because it clearly rotted Gandalf's mind, though. So,
it did. So I mean, the halfling's leaf has clearly slowed your mind. So yeah, maybe there is some truth to that. It's tobacco, goddammit. But the bit with like the ship as well, and again that Shire music. I love that instant friendship that you get. Regardless if you know about the Hobbit. Obviously, the Hobbit films haven't come out at that point, but from that knock on the door to that reaction with Ian Holm, where he opens the door. and the two of them embrace it. It's a beautiful scene.
Yeah, just that.
Yeah, go on.
He's listing off the people he doesn't want there, and as soon as he hears Gandalf's voice, he's like, "Nah, that's it. Come on in, mate." And like that sets the scene so perfectly of just exactly who these characters are, what they mean to each other. Because you get from the start, you get the sense of Bilbo just being this grouchy old man who hates everyone, doesn't want to be there, and all the rest of it. But as soon as his friend turns up, he becomes like the most gracious host of all time. And that is a lovely like scene to sort of set them between the two of them.
I think probably one of the most, one of my favourite shots, and I love how they did it. You watch the behind the scenes, how they combine it all together, is Gandalf whispers to the moth to go and fetch Gway here, and then the camera goes off the edge of Orthanc, down, plummets down the side of the tower, chasm after chasm, and it like hits that anvil at the bottom. That is just an awe-inspiring shot how they did that. But I think probably one of the most beautiful shots in the film to me, and it's kind of, again, collection of scenes, but how it builds that atmosphere and the music's brilliant. And I'm going with the extended cut on this one because this adds all those extra scenes in. They're parting from Lothlorien where they're given all the gifts.
Yeah.
And I love how the scene's constructed as well, because it's kind of like functions as a flashback as well.
Yeah.
She's given the gifts and it flashes forward to them on their journey, flashes back to them receiving the individual gifts. Gimli's line where he's like, I asked her for one hair off her golden head. She gave me three.
Oh, yeah. And they'll know his smile of Legolas because he knows the significance of that moment and all the rest of it. Yeah, it's
You've got that and then the Argonath, which is
that was going to be my other one. Again, just that set design is just stunning, and and again it really makes you think that like this isn't. This world wasn't created for this story. This story is just one that happens to be taking place in this world, because you can see like the history of that, and when you later see like the head of one of the statues, overgrown with things, like this is old. This is a very old. Like that statue was probably in its prime for a while and was then destroyed, and it has been destroyed for so long that nature has now reclaimed it and all the rest of it. Like just that visual storytelling again of like making this world feel lived in. I love that. That bit of set design there.
Yeah, it feels like you're walking into this world that already exists, and this world, although it's a historic world, has its own history as well. And, and by the time you get to the Silmarillion, it's own goddamn creation myth as well.
Yeah.
Before we move on to sort of like wrapping up with this, the impact of it, we talked about favorite moments and scenes. Do you have a favorite line? Now, this could be just a line that sounds cool, that sounds beautiful, that sounds poetic, or one that you just quote in your day-to-day. From this film in particular, do you have one?
I'm sure I do, but I'm drawing a blank. If you've got one, you say yours, then I think about this. You've sprung me on this completely unprepared, Chris. It's a vile prank, and you should be ashamed of yourself.
I mean, I'm totally ashamed of myself, but you do realise that me going in first, I'm probably going to take a couple of the zingers, and then you've got to think outside the box for another one. I quote "Fool of a Took" quite a lot.
Yeah, that's a great one.
And throw yourself in next time and rid us of your stupidity.
Fly you fools again in the same way as I'm going to take that one before you do, because like I've said that in so many contexts that is absolutely inappropriate for in so many times, because it's just the delivery of it is just again perfect, and the pacing and the way and the beat, like the music cuts out just for him to whisper this, and then the music cuts back in. Amazing. Again, fantastic line.
I think a huge impact as well. We're kind of talking about this because of the 20th anniversary. Meme culture now. These films. Like I remember seeing this film in cinema, even like a number of years ago now. Actually, at the same place that's taking place in just over an hour's time. It was an extended edition marathon throughout the night. Started at 9 p.m. went ticked into the next day to 8 a.m. It was ridiculous. Never again. But everyone was laughing at the lines. We exist in meme culture now. So one does not simply.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the classic.
So there's always that. Any other ones?
Give them a moment's rest for pity's sake. I've seen that quite a lot. Basically, anything Boromir said has been twisted and contorted into some form of a.
Second breakfast is amazing.
Second breakfast, of course. And Pippin getting pelted in the face with an apple. Stunning. Yeah.
But it's mostly the Gandalf ones, as I mentioned, there was the Fool of a Took. I love his outburst at Bilbo. He's like, "You wanted for yourself, Bilbo Baggins," and he raises his voice like it's
I'm
just
trying
the way
to help you. Yeah, stunning.
Oh,
Bilbo's line about too little butter spread across too much bread is honestly like I think a philosophical wonder. I think about I actually in like my moments of like burnout and stress, I think about that. I'm like, there's just not enough butter. There's just too much bread. We'll just calm down. It's gonna be fine. We'll move on and like all the rest of it. Like it's no. I think because we're talking about some of like the funny and iconic moments and like and my axe and all the rest of it.
Mhm.
But like I think there are so many genuinely like sweet and meaningful little moments that I think are perfect. It's not all just like half pints and pints, you know what I mean? There are these lovely little genuinely like lovely moments. And again, I think these are definitely a lot more in the like later films, like, especially when Sam starts becoming into his own. You have some of like I'll talk about this again in the Return of the King one, but the conversation that Gandalf has about death with Pippin when they're in Minas Tirith, I think is still one of my favorite scenes because I didn't realize that's not in the books. That is
No?
entirely created by Peter Jackson for this film, and like it is one of the most lovely things I think I've ever heard about like the idea of death and all the rest
There's
of it.
another speech from that film that I always thought was in the books and it isn't. So yeah, that'll be a great conversation when we get to
We'll
Return
talk
of the
about more of that
King.
in the next one. But
You talk about the thought-provoking ones again. I'm sticking with Gandalf for this one, but the bit in Moria and then it comes back again at the end to sort of cap off the emotional crux of the film. I wish the ring had never come to me. I wish.
of course, that's exactly what I was going to talk about. Yeah,
all we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us. It's just that exchange, the music as well behind it, breaking the fellowship. It breaks my heart. It's called the breaking the fellowship. It's breaking my heart.
And I think again, to me, those meaningful ones are almost always Gandalf and Sam, and I think one of my favorite parts is the fact that they are delivered so differently. Like you have Gandalf, this wise sage, this voice of wisdom and worldly knowledge, and Sam, this like delightful but somewhat dense character who is just the most well-meaning and delightful human being, well, hobbit, that could ever possibly exist. The I'm going alone, of course you are. And I'm going with you. Like the idea of like it's not even a thought for him. He's like, yeah, obviously, yeah, but other than me though, like, I'm coming.
Yeah.
So
and that's a big difference from the book to the film as well, in the representation of depiction, I would say, of Frodo and Sam. In the films, they're best friends, you know. It is ride or die. And that's the same goes for the book, but in the book, there's more of like a class dynamic. You know, Frodo is this well-respected, wealthy, well-off hobbit who's, you know, respected by the community, and Sam is basically just his gardener. You know, there is definitely and you know, this could be the parallels to like the war, for example, but he's very much his like batsman, the dog's body kind of thing. It's almost like the Baldric to Frodo's Blackadder, almost in a kind of way of that. And you know, I do like that dynamic, and I think it works for the book. But I do like the switch of that and how they do alter that for the films, definitely. But nevertheless, I think by the time you get to Return of the King, you get to that moment on Mount Doom.
Which is, again, like it's just
it's just wonderful. The last line that I'll throw out there before I bring up Carl's comment, Boromir's I would have followed you, my brother.
Oh, of course, my brother, my general, my king, yeah.
It's so many great lines, so many. The whole film's quotable. And Carl has another one here, another zinger. Whenever someone offers me some,
don't tempt me, Frodo. How could I forget? Don't tempt me. I say that every single day. I can't believe I forgot that one. That is outrageous.
I think Gandalf's definitely winning out here. We've got another one. It's like, a wizard is never late, nor is he early. He arrives precisely when he means to.
I feel like a fake fan right now. I'm not talking about all these good lines.
Of course, you've got that moment there from where that quote is. You know, the dun, 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 dun.
Yeah.
You seen that video?
I've done more. I've seen it.
It's meme culture. It's just, you know, for better or worse,
pervasive. We can't get away from it.
And you know, maybe we talk about the impact of meme culture, but just the impact of this film, and it's very difficult to say the impact of this film,
not because the trilogy as a whole. Yeah,
it's absolutely the trilogy, isn't it? But
I think for me, no, please.
I was saying, in terms of like the fantasy genre, you know, before this, if you look at the fantasy films, what did you really have? I mean, you guess there's an argument to be made that Star Wars is fantasy, you know, science fiction.
There's that one with Warwick Davis, Willow, or whatever it's called.
I love Willow. I will die on this hill. Exactly. I love Willow, and it's like bite-sized Lord of the Rings, I would say. Willow, in many respects. You have that. You have Dragonheart, Labyrinth, Legend, like the Ridley Scott Legend
Princess
film.
Bride, that's fantasy-esque.
And they're all very, I love all of those films that you just mentioned. They're very whimsical and very fairy-like, but nothing had came along like this. And
No,
that
this
kind
is
of goes the same with the book as well. When Tolkien wrote that book, he did it as a homage to all those, wonderful Norse mythologies and stories that he had growing up, and legends of dragons and swords and sorcery, but he made his own mythology out of it. And to take that so directly and adapt it, when that book came out, that rocked the world, especially in terms of the fantasy genre. And as you mentioned, it's the granddaddy of modern
it is.
fantasy.
It's the big boy. Like, I mean,
and same goes for the films now. Like every fantasy film that comes out now is kind of beholden, I would say, to the Lord of the Rings films.
Yeah, I know, absolutely. I think it showed that there was an interest in fantasy. Things like Game of Thrones, like, wouldn't have existed without the success of Lord of the Rings. At least not in the visual format. Like, I still don't think, other than Lord of the Rings, and anyone get in the comments, or you yourself, Chris, if you've got anything, can you think of another like hard fantasy? And I mean, like, I'm not going to start chatting here for ages about the different sort of subgenres of fantasy, but you know what I mean when I say that high fantasy, that hard fantasy of just like pure.
Yeah.
Like,
certainly
I don't
not
think there's
in
anything
films.
because you have there's a lot of dark fantasy out there, like The Witcher. You got your Game of Thrones with that sort of like low magic settings and all that sort of stuff.
So a lot of video games, certainly. As I mentioned, I know Witcher was originally books that were adapted into video games, which has been adapted into a Netflix series.
Yeah.
Elder Scrolls, certainly, but so much of that is,
But that even when you talk about things like, I mean, like the biggest like obvious for me as a person, like the biggest purveyor of high fantasy these days is D&D, Dungeons and Dragons, because there are millions of stories out there. But I think if you showed Tolkien Dungeons and Dragons, he would hate it.
Oh yeah, of course he would.
Because if you think about, although Lord of the Rings is this high fantasy and it is the highest of high fantasy, it's also very low magic. You know what I mean? Like, there is magic in the series, but it's very much a case of like, it's weird. We're not going to get into it. It's just kind of there and it does stuff. You can't use it. Only Gandalf can do it. And some of the elves. So just leave it alone. All right, we're just going to move on. Whereas, like, I think a lot of later fantasy novels had the idea of wizards as like commonplace. Like, they're just the things that are around. And I think Tolkien's reverence of magic, I think, is such a huge part of the book, because in so many things, like even things like Aragon, for example, which is a series that I love despite the many flaws. Not the film doesn't count. Like, there's so many arguments of like, why wouldn't you just use magic to fix this problem, or why wouldn't they just magic? And the Lord of the Rings has that with the Eagles, but like for the most part, it's the case of like there is never any reason of like the reason they walked to Mordor and did all this bullshit was because that's the only way they could do it. All right, there is literally no other way, and like I don't think that degree of cohesion, that degree of like everything in Lord of the Rings, especially in Fellowship, I think has such a purpose. Like, it's all leading to that one final moment of the breaking of the Fellowship. Like, the idea that these people can't do it all together because that just simply won't work. And I think we've never seen anything that focused since. Like, I'm sure there are novels out there that haven't had these adaptations, and I think, again, this is such a lightning in the bottle one. I think the Fellowship was that way of showing what fantasy adaptations are capable of, and to me, it's just very sad that despite showing that, we never saw it again. Like, they were like, "Yep, we can do this. We can make a masterpiece, but let's just do it once and then never again." And I think that's the impact to me. Like, it's why after all these years, despite the games I've played, the books I've read, the films I've watched, I always keep coming back to Lord of the Rings. It's why the Lord of the Rings can pump out a bunch of awful games every year, and I'll be like, maybe it's good though. Lord of the Rings.
Some of them are great. Some of them are great. Yeah, some of the games are great. We'll probably
many are not.
Yeah, more than when we get to like Two Towers, Return of the King.
Oh, those games. Oof, great games.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, fantasy is my favorite genre of all time, and there are so many like pick and choose. In terms of books, you've got Discworld, you've got Game of Thrones, you've got Lord of the Rings, you've got Wheel of Time, which is obviously getting its
absolutely. The Witcher series. Brandon Sanderson, he's got some fantastic books. Yeah.
And I mean, really, it's such a wide open genre, but a lot of it is so beholden to Tolkien. And the more that you read Tolkien, the more you get into it, and the material is there if you want to do a deep dive into Tolkien, or you've got the Silmarillion, you can go through Unfinished Tales, Children of Húrin, all of that stuff. The more you go into it, it is my favorite legendarium, and
Absolutely.
it's to the point where now I know variety is the spice of life. It's good to read a whole bunch of other things, whether it's Chronicles of Narnia, whatever it happens to be, but something always keeps bringing me back to Tolkien. And every other mythology, every other fantasy novel that I read, they could be great, but none feel in that high fantasy realm as what Tolkien achieved with the books. The Hobbit, certainly, I know that's some would say it is more simplistically written. I would say it's a different tone, it's a different audience entirely for that book, but that's Absolutely. The one that I go back to because it is that fun fantasy realm.
I would happily sit down and read The Hobbit every night, to be honest. I think it has that beautiful homely feeling that, again, that like it's less of the hero's journey, I think, than Lord of the Rings. I think because of that, we're exposed far more to that oversaturation of the hero's journey that you see in stuff like Lord of the Rings. But despite that, Lord of the Rings is the one that I keep coming back to, like you say, and I think that is just, I think that's the best legacy any film could possibly hope for, is the fact that after 20 years, we're still willing to talk for nearly 2 hours about how good this film is.
Yeah.
because there hasn't been enough films in that 20-year void that we could talk about instead. We're coming back to this one and saying, yeah, you know what, this film still absolutely slaps.
Yeah. And we both love our films. We can both talk films, but this is kind of both the best and saddest things about Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings trilogy. And this one is my favorite of the three. I never kind of explained why that is. I mean, I always view the Lord of the Rings films as one film, like one complete film, one complete story. All three are interchangeable, Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. Gun to my head, which one is my favorite of the three? It would be this one. And I think there is a noticeable difference between the filmmaking approach used in Fellowship compared to the other two. And I think by the time you get to the other two, I won't say they get like studio focus, but they definitely feel Two Towers and Return of the King definitely feel more like studio films than this one does. This almost feels like an insanely high budget, sort of like independent film almost. A lot of the camera angles, the zooms, which Peter Jackson used in a lot of his other ones, like, is it secret? Is it safe? Like, there's very invasive camera angles. They're more evident in this one, I think. And not to say that it becomes over reliant on CGI, because I don't think any of the three become over reliant on CGI, but it definitely dials up more than this one.
No,
so
for sure.
This one just feels, out of the three, like more purer to Tolkien, I guess, in terms of adaptation. I don't know, but there's something about this film. I think the sense of how complete it feels, although it's an Act 1 and it ends on a literal cliffhanger of Frodo and Sam walking down a rock, it has a sense of character arcs. Things have been achieved within this one film. It doesn't kind of like cut off and leave it open-ended. There is a sense of resolution to the film, a great emotional payoff with Frodo knowing what he needs to do, the breaking of the Fellowship, the death of Boromir, and it has my favorite sort of like fantastical action elements with the Moria sequence. I love the stuff in the Shire at the beginning with Ian Holm. I don't know. This one is just really sweet to me. If I'm going to throw one on just to watch it, it would probably be this one.
I mean, to be fair, if you're going to throw one on just to watch it, the first one is usually a good way to do that. Like, my favorite is The Two Towers, and I'll talk about why that is next time. But I would never just throw on The Two Towers to watch it. If I'm watching The Two Towers, I'm watching all three. It's as simple as that. But I totally agree. I think the fact that they dedicate basically half the film to just this, to the setup, I think the Council of Elrond is like, at least in the extended cut, it's the end of disc 1. That's the end of the Council of Elrond. Pippin says, "Where are we going?" And the film cuts out, and you have to put in disc 2. I remember that vividly.
The story continues on disc 2.
Yeah, I remember vividly. I remember that.
I mean, we've got Blu-ray, we've got 4K, and it's still split over 2 discs.
Exactly.
Like, what definition do we need to get to? How much data do we have to hold on a disc where we can get it all in one disc?
No, it's wrong. Even if I could, I wouldn't want to. That's important now. I need to have that moment of transition. I mean, I couldn't have it any other way, Chris.
Like
but yeah, again, having that setup for the entire film, I think, is such a brave move, and I think it pays off because it means then you can dedicate the rest of the screen time of The Two Towers and Return of the King to just this much more character focused and driven thing without having the need to have the setup. And I can totally understand why you would say Fellowship is your favorite. I don't think there are any bad films amongst Lord of the Rings
No.
in any way, shape, or form. There are only slightly worse ones. I said this to you at the start, before we started recording, but like for me, The Fellowship is my least favorite of the three. But that's like saying it's the worst work of Picasso, the worst work of Da Vinci. It's the weakest masterpiece. It's the worst perfect.
Yeah.
It's the worst perfect film.
Yeah.
Like it is such. It is just all comes down to personal preference. It's and yeah, it is absolutely stunning. It is a marvel of filmmaking, the likes of which we will never see again.
And that's, when I said it's both the greatest thing and the saddest
Yeah.
thing ever, is that we have been presented three fantastic films that are a marvel to watch, that are so emotionally fulfilling to me, that are so important to me. I can't imagine a world without Lord of the Rings in it.
No, honestly,
it's a world
my personality would be a very different beast than what it is today without Lord of the Rings.
It's that sense of escapism you always want from the fantasy genre. It's why it's my favorite genre. But also, the double-edged sword of that is that because I've been beholden to these films, even since 2003, a film has never even come close to these films for me, in terms of that impact, in terms of me watching a film going, I have no idea how they made this, hitting me in that way, having that connection with me. So I blame you, Peter Jackson, the greatest film of all time. How very dare you. Carl, beautiful comment here from Carl as well, which will round us off nicely, I think. It's one of those films where you forget you're watching a film. It's like you're viewing history as it happened, and that's exactly.
Yeah, I think that sums it up absolutely beautifully. Yeah.
So, I mean, we're coming up to 2 hours. We might get it 2 hours bang on the dot, which is quite nice, actually.
Yeah, rounded off quite well.
We could talk for like a week on this one film, on every moment. And maybe I'll get to talk about more of those moments, because tomorrow, to celebrate the 20th anniversary, it's like a double whammy. It's like 2 parts almost. We've done the review now. It might be backwards before coming forwards, but tomorrow, for the actual day of the 20th anniversary, I will be going live. I don't know what time yet, but hopefully a respectable time. It's a very long film, for a live watch along of the Fellowship of the Ring. Extended edition, of course.
I was going to say extended cut, of course. Yeah, good.
Yeah, if you've got the
if it wasn't, I wouldn't be coming back for these other two videos. So,
exactly. And I'm definitely not going to watch both. I'm not going to do one watch along of theatrical and one that is not happening. If you've got the DVD, if you've got the Blu-ray, if you've got the remastered Blu-ray, 4K, whatever it happens to be, digital download, if you've got a copy of Fellowship of the Ring, and if you don't have that in your film collection, then I question you as a film fan. Get it synced up with me tomorrow. We're going to go through it. We're going to, I don't know, I might get some drinks in. Who knows? I'll definitely need some snacks, second breakfast to get me through it. And it's going to be fun. We're going to be going through all the lines. I'm going to be talking about some of my favorite moments, and probably just end up watching the film, in all honesty. So if you're around tomorrow, if you've got 3 and a bit hours to kill, definitely join me for that one. Of course, we don't just talk about Lord of the Rings on the channel, although I wish we kind of did. That would be amazing. But there are some other films also coming out in the month of December. The big one is coming out next week. There is a new Matrix film out, Matrix Resurrections, which comes out in the UK on the 22nd of December. And we'll be closing off the Matrix trilogy on Tuesday next week. So we'll be having our Matrix Revolutions review. I've seen that film one time back in the day in 2003 when it came out. So I'll be revisiting that. That's definitely going to be, hopefully, well, I don't know if it'll be a lot of fun. It'll be educational, shall we say. Got a lot of other videos to close us out into the month of December as well. And then we're into 2022 and the whole cycle repeats. But we've done 1 of 3 Lord of the Rings films, and of course we'll be back. Harry, you have to come back.
I'll be back. Don't worry. I definitely wouldn't be missing out on the 2 Towers. I need to educate you about why Helm's Deep is the greatest spectacle in cinema of all time.
I agree.
So
we're in agreement here. There's all love there. It's great.
Regardless, I'm going to lecture at you anyway, Chris. You brought me on, so
there's going to be clipboards. There's going to be notes.
I've got the chart. It's actually it's a 9-hour presentation. You don't get to speak. Yeah, it's going to be great.
Maybe I should question myself that I would quite honestly, wholeheartedly watch a 9-hour video detailing Helm's Deep and why it's great.
Yeah.
Anyway, that'll do it from us. But we want to hear from you guys as well. People have been commenting today. We want to hear from you. We love hearing your comments. We always comment back too. Let us know what you think of the Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring, 2 Towers, Return of the King, anything. How did you get into Tolkien? Anything regarding these films, whether you like them or dislike them. I'm interested to hear opinions all across.
Yeah, anyone's entitled to their opinion, even if it's wrong. So
Exactly. Be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. Spread the word. as we go through these films. And one more time for the socials as well. Twitter at cinema_savvy and Facebook and letterbox.com/cinemasavvy. Go and check us out there. We'll have times for when we go up for the Two Towers as well and Return the King, and indeed for the watch along tomorrow. So please head on over there and check that out if you haven't done so already. Harry, once again, thank you, my friend, for devoting 2 hours of your night tonight on Saturday to talk about The Lord of the Rings. That sounds like a damn fine evening to me.
Honestly, mate, yeah, I wish I could do this more Saturday nights. So, yeah, no, thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure to come back on, and I'll be seeing you again shortly for Two Towers anyway. So,
indeed, there we go. Two Towers next time, everyone.
That's it.